The man I tried to save died in my arms 2 years ago. Now his widow lives next door and I can't breathe. Noah Carter stood frozen at his mailbox, finally trapped by the one person he'd spent 8 months avoiding. Victoria Hale's green eyes held him in place like a physical force. She wasn't moving, wasn't smiling. This time, she wanted answers. If you want to know how a firefighter's worst failure became his salvation, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The pre-dawn cold bit through Noah's jacket as he stepped onto his porch, coffee mug steaming in the February air. 4:30 in the morning. The street sat dark and silent, exactly how he needed it. This was his time, the only hour of the day when he didn't have to perform the exhausting theater of being fine. He'd perfected the schedule down to the minute. Wake at 4:15, coffee on the porch by 4:30, back inside by 5:10, before the neighbor's kitchen light clicked on, before her kitchen light clicked on. 8 months. He'd been counting. Noah took a long sip, letting the bitter heat anchor him to something real. Across the street, the Hendersons' porch light flickered the way it had for 3 years. He'd offered to fix it twice. They never took him up on it. The maple tree in the Johnsons' yard had lost another major branch in last week's ice storm, hanging now at a dangerous angle over their fence. Normal observations. Normal morning. He could do this. Then the porch light next door flicked on. His chest tightened immediately, that familiar vice grip that made his ribs feel too small for his lungs. Noah's hand jerked, coffee sloshing over the rim of his mug. He didn't look, wouldn't look, just needed to get inside before... Beautiful morning, her voice carried across the narrow strip of grass between their houses, soft but clear. Not a question. Not even really a greeting, just words thrown into the space he was trying desperately to keep empty. Noah's jaw locked. He managed a noise that might have been agreement, might have been acknowledgement, might have been nothing at all. His feet stayed planted when they should have been moving. Just turn around, walk inside, you've done this before. I made extra cinnamon rolls yesterday, Victoria continued, and he could hear her moving now, her footsteps light on her porch. Thought maybe Ethan might... He's good. The words came out rougher than he intended, sharp edges he couldn't file down. Thanks. Silence stretched between them. Noah stared at the coffee swirling in his mug, watching the surface ripple from the tremor in his hand. Noah. Something in the way she said his name made his spine straighten involuntarily. Not pleading, not angry, just tired. Done with whatever dance they'd been performing. I need you to look at me. I can't. The admission escaped before he could catch it, raw and honest in a way he hadn't been with anyone in months, maybe years. Why not? Because looking at you feels like drowning, because your face is in every nightmare I can't shake, because I made a promise I couldn't keep, and you're the living proof of that failure. It's early, he said instead. I've got shift prep. You're not on shift today. Her voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath now. It's Tuesday. You work 48 on, 96 off. Today's your day with Ethan before school. The fact that she knew his schedule sent ice down his spine. Victoria, 8 months, Noah. Now he could hear her moving closer, her feet hitting the porch steps. 8 months of you treating me like I'm contagious, like eye contact might kill you. I've tried being patient. I've tried giving you space. I brought you dinner when you had the flu in October. You left it on the porch until it went cold. She'd noticed that. Of course she'd noticed that. I fixed your fence in November, she continued, and there was something sharp working its way into her tone now, something that sounded like anger but felt more like hurt. The section that was rotting out by the gate. You tore it down the next day and rebuilt the whole thing from scratch rather than use lumber I'd touched. Noah's eyes squeezed shut. He hadn't thought she'd seen that. December, you shoveled your driveway at 3 in the morning so you wouldn't risk running into me doing mine. January, you started parking in your garage instead of the street, even though you hate how cramped it is, because it meant you could get in and out of your house without the possibility of a 30-second conversation. Each observation landed like a physical blow. She'd been watching, cataloging, noticing every single way he'd been trying to disappear. What did I do? The question came out smaller now, and that was somehow worse than the anger. Just tell me what I did, and I'll fix it. I'll leave if that's what you need. I'll sell the house. But I need you to tell me why you can't stand to be in the same zip code as me. It's not. Noah's throat closed around the words. His eyes were still shut, his whole body rigid with the effort of staying upright. You didn't do anything. Then what? I can't. Look at me. Victoria, look at me. The command in her voice snapped something. Noah's eyes opened against his will, his head turning before his brain could stop the motion. And there she was. Victoria Hale, 30 years old, 5'6", dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, green eyes that had probably been beautiful before grief hollowed out the spaces underneath. She wore an oversized Oregon State sweatshirt and jeans, her feet bare despite the cold. No makeup, no jewelry except for a thin silver chain that disappeared under her collar. She looked tired. So tired. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and Noah couldn't breathe. There, Victoria said quietly, holding his gaze. That wasn't so hard, was it? But it was. It was impossibly hard, because looking at her dragged him back to a morning 2 years ago, to flames and smoke and the sound of a man choking on his own blood, to promises made and broken, to the weight of a stranger's hand going slack in his. Why do you live here? The question tore out of him before he could think better of it. Of all the places in Oregon, in the whole damn country, why here? Why this street? Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. You know why? I don't. Yes, you do. She took another step closer, closing the distance between their yards. You've known since the day I moved in. You just haven't wanted to say it out loud. Noah's mug slipped from his fingers, hitting the porch with a crack that split the quiet morning. Coffee spread across the wood in a dark stain. Neither of them looked down. I read the report, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could see starting in her shoulders. Every word, every statement, every timeline notation. I know what engine company responded. I know who went into that building. I know who stayed. No, she couldn't. I know you held his hand. The words came out soft, almost gentle, but they eviscerated him anyway. I know you talked to him. I know you promised him you'd get him out. Noah's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the porch step, his hands coming up to cover his face. A sound escaped him that might have been a word or might have been just air being forced from his lungs. So when the house next door went up for sale, Victoria continued, and he could hear her moving again, closer now. I bought it, paid cash, moved in 3 weeks later. Why? The word came out muffled against his palms. Because I needed to know. Know what? Who you were. The man whose name I'd read 50 times in that report. The one who stayed when the building was coming down. The one who... Her voice caught, the first real break in her composure. The one who made sure my husband didn't die alone. Noah's hands dropped. He stared up at her. This woman he'd been running from for 8 months, and saw tears tracking down her cheeks. But her eyes stayed steady on his. You want to know why looking at me hurts? Victoria's voice was rough now, scraped raw. Fine, I'll tell you why. Because you see him when you see me. Because I'm a walking reminder of the worst day of your life. Because you made a promise you couldn't keep, and my face is proof of that failure. She was right. Every word was exactly right, but hearing it said out loud made it so much worse. I tried to save him. Noah's voice cracked. I tried everything. The debris was too heavy, and the fire was spreading too fast, and I couldn't get him out. I stayed because leaving him there alone felt worse than dying, but maybe if I'd gone for help faster, maybe if I'd... Stop. Victoria dropped down to sit beside him on her porch steps, maintaining a careful foot of distance between them. Just stop. He told me about you. The confession spilled out like poison he'd been holding in too long. He was bleeding out, and the smoke was so thick I could barely see him, and he kept talking about you, about your anniversary, about the trip to Italy you had planned, about how he just needed to hold on a little longer because you'd be so mad if he missed it. Victoria's breath hitched, but she didn't interrupt. He said your name 47 times. Noah's hands were shaking now, his whole body starting to come apart. I counted. Between the moment I reached him and the moment he stopped breathing, he said Victoria 47 times. And I promised him, I swore to him, that I would get him home to you. But you couldn't. No, I couldn't. They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning cold settling around them like a living thing. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car engine turned over, sputtered, died. His name was Daniel, Victoria said finally, her voice distant. Daniel Hale. We met in college, got married at 24. Everyone said we were too young, but we didn't care. He was brilliant, funny, had this terrible habit of leaving cabinet doors open. I used to leave sticky notes on every single one telling him to close them. Noah listened, his throat too tight to speak. He worked in commercial real estate development. That warehouse was one of his projects. He wasn't supposed to be there that morning. He had a meeting in Portland. But the contractor called about a problem with the electrical, and Daniel wanted to see it himself before they tore into the walls. Her hands twisted together in her lap. If he'd just trusted them to handle it, if he'd just gone to his meeting like he was supposed to. Victoria. I got the call at 8:43 a.m. She kept talking, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. They told me there'd been a fire, that Daniel was being transported to St. Vincent's. They used words like critical and severe trauma and prepare yourself, but I didn't understand. I didn't let myself understand. I drove 90 miles an hour down Highway 26, and the whole time I kept thinking he'd be okay. He had to be okay. We had dinner reservations that night. Her voice broke on the last word. When I got there, they took me to a room. Not the ER, not the ICU. A room with soft lighting and a box of tissues and a chaplain. And I knew. Before anyone said a word, I knew. Noah's chest felt like it was caving in. They told me he'd been trapped, that a first responder stayed with him, that he didn't suffer at the end. Victoria turned to look at him finally, her eyes red but dry now. But that was a lie, wasn't it? The didn't suffer part. He wanted to lie. Wanted to give her the comfort of thinking Daniel's death had been peaceful. But she was looking at him like she'd know, like she could see through any fiction he tried to construct. He was scared, Noah said quietly, and in pain. But he wasn't alone. I made sure he wasn't alone. Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing this. Thank you for that. For staying. I should have saved him. You couldn't have. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Her voice hardened, something fierce entering her expression. I've read that report 50 times, Noah. 100 times. I know the building was condemned 2 months later because the owners had ignored every safety violation in the book. I know the sprinkler system hadn't worked in 6 years. I know they'd stored chemical accelerants in an unventilated space. I know the structural supports were rotted through. She stood up, suddenly restless, pacing across her porch. I know that you went into that building when you shouldn't have. I know your captain ordered an evacuation and you ignored it. I know you crawled through fire to reach a man you'd never met, and you stayed with him when staying meant you might die too. That's my job. No, your job is to fight fires and follow orders. What you did was... She stopped, searching for words. It was something else. Something that had nothing to do with training or duty. Noah stood too, unable to sit still under the weight of her gaze. What do you want from me, Victoria? You want me to say I'm a hero? I'm not. I failed. Your husband died while I held his hand and told him he'd be fine. That's not heroism. That's just being there for the worst moment of someone's life and being powerless to stop it. I don't want you to be a hero. Her voice rose, frustration bleeding through. I want you to stop punishing yourself for being human. I want you to stop avoiding me like I'm the ghost of your failures. I want... She cut herself off, turning away. What? Noah pressed. What do you want? I want to know what he said. The words came out barely above a whisper. In those last moments, I want to know if he was thinking of me. If there was any message, anything. The request hit Noah like a physical blow. This was what she'd been waiting for. 8 months of living next door, of trying to build bridges he kept burning, and this was what she actually needed. I can't, he said, the words scraping out of him. Why not? Because it'll destroy you. I'm already destroyed. Victoria turned back to face him, and the raw honesty in her expression made Noah's knees weak. My husband died 2 years ago in a warehouse fire. I've spent every day since then trying to piece together his last moments from a 20-page report written in clinical language by people who weren't there. You were there. You heard him. You were the last person he spoke to. And you've been hiding from me for 8 months rather than tell me what I have every right to know. Isitoy Imarsan. She was right. She had every right. But knowing what Daniel said and actually hearing it were two different things, and Noah wasn't sure Victoria understood the difference. He talked about Italy, Noah heard himself say. Your anniversary trip. He said you'd been planning it for 2 years. He was worried about missing it. Victoria's hand came up to cover her mouth. He said you'd made him promise to go to the Uffizi Gallery, even though he thought museums were boring. Said you had this whole itinerary planned, color-coded and everything, and he was giving you shit about it, but secretly loved how organized you were. A sound escaped Victoria that was half laugh, half sob. He said he was sorry. Noah's voice dropped. Over and over. Sorry he took the meeting. Sorry he came to the warehouse. Sorry he wasn't going to make it home for dinner. He kept saying, tell Victoria I'm sorry, like it was the most important thing in the world. What else? Noah's hands curled into fists. Victoria. What else did he say? He said he loved you. He said... Noah's voice broke. He said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. That marrying you was the only smart decision he'd ever made. That he'd do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, even knowing how it ended because you were worth it. Victoria's legs gave out. She sat down hard on her porch steps, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. Noah stood frozen, watching her fall apart and having no idea how to help. And then? She managed to get out between gasps. Then he asked me to make sure you knew, made me promise I'd tell you, made me swear I wouldn't let you think. Noah had to stop, had to swallow against the lump in his throat. He didn't want you to think he'd been thinking about work or the fire or anything else. He wanted you to know that you were his last thought, that you were all he could think about. Victoria was crying in earnest now, her hands pressed against her face, her shoulders heaving. Noah took a step toward her, stopped, took another step. He didn't know what to do with his hands, didn't know if touching her would help or make everything worse. I'm sorry, he said uselessly. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry I let him die. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Victoria's voice came out muffled and thick. Please, just stop. They stood there at the growing light, two people wrecked by the same tragedy, separated by guilt and grief and 8 months of deliberate distance. A door slammed somewhere down the street. The Hendersons' porch light finally gave up and went dark. Morning was coming whether they were ready for it or not. I should go, Noah said, because he didn't know what else to say. Don't. Victoria lowered her hands, her face blotchy and wet. Please don't run away this time. I'm not running. Yes, you are. You've been running since the day I moved in. Every time I try to talk to you, every time I bring you food or offer to help with Ethan or just try to be a decent neighbor, you run. Because being near you hurts. The admission came out harsh and honest. Because you look at me and I see the moment your husband's eyes went blank. Because I can't separate you from the worst thing I've ever done. I'm not asking you to. Victoria stood, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm poison. I'm asking you to acknowledge that we're both living with the same ghost, and maybe we'd both hurt a little less if we stopped pretending the other person doesn't exist. Noah wanted to argue, wanted to explain that acknowledging her existence meant acknowledging his failure, but the exhaustion in her eyes stopped him. She looked like she'd been fighting this battle alone for too long. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. Neither do I. A bitter smile crossed her face. But I moved here because the report said Daniel didn't die alone. Because knowing someone stayed with him, someone talked to him, someone tried to save him, that was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. And then I found out that person lived a normal life in a quiet Oregon town, and I needed to see it. Needed to see you. Needed to understand how you could do something like that and then just go back to fighting fires and raising your son and drinking coffee on your porch at 4:30 in the morning. What did you expect to find? I don't know. A monster, maybe. Someone callous enough to make promises they couldn't keep and then move on. Or a saint. Someone so good they'd sacrifice themselves without thinking twice. She shook her head. But you're neither of those things. You're just a person. A person who did something extraordinary in the middle of something terrible and then had to figure out how to live with it. I haven't figured that out. I know. I can see it every time you look at me. Victoria crossed her arms, hugging herself against the cold. But here's what you need to understand, Noah. I didn't move here to torture you. I didn't buy this house to be a constant reminder of your failures. I moved here because knowing you existed was the only comfort I had, and I needed that comfort to be close enough to feel real. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. Grief doesn't make sense. Her voice rose slightly, passion breaking through the exhaustion. I spent a year trying to be angry at someone, at the warehouse owners for the violations, at Daniel's boss for sending him there, at the fire department for not getting there faster, at God for letting it happen. But none of that anger stuck because none of those people were there. None of them held his hand. None of them heard his last words. She took a step closer, and Noah forced himself not to retreat. You were there, Victoria said quietly. You're the only person in the world who knows what his last moments were really like. And I needed to know you. Needed to see if you were worth the faith Daniel put in you when he asked you to carry his message. And? Noah's voice came out rough. And you've spent 8 months shoveling my driveway in the middle of the night, fixing my fence, leaving groceries on my porch when I had the flu and couldn't get to the store. You think I didn't notice? You think I didn't see you out here at 2 a.m. making sure my walkway was clear before the ice set in? Noah's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought she'd noticed, had hoped she wouldn't. You can't even look at me without flinching, Victoria continued. But you make sure I'm safe. Make sure I'm taken care of. You carry guilt like it's a religion, but you keep doing these small, kind things that you think I don't see. That's just being a decent neighbor. No, it's not. It's penance. You're trying to take care of me the way you couldn't take care of him. Her eyes softened. And I've let you because it made me feel closer to Daniel somehow, like he'd sent you to watch over me. He didn't. I know that, but it's a nice thought, isn't it? That the man who tried to save my husband's life might stick around to help save mine. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Noah didn't know how to respond, didn't know if there was a response that wouldn't shatter whatever fragile understanding they'd managed to build. A light flickered on upstairs in Noah's house, Ethan's room. The kid would be up in 15 minutes, bleary-eyed and grumpy, demanding breakfast and asking questions Noah didn't have the energy to answer. I have to go, Noah said, because it was true, and because he needed an escape route before this conversation went somewhere he couldn't follow. Okay, Victoria didn't argue this time, just watched him with those tired green eyes. But Noah? He paused at his door. Thank you for telling me, for finally telling me what he said. Noah nodded once, not trusting his voice, and disappeared into his house before she could say anything else. Inside, he leaned against the door and tried to remember how to breathe. His hands were shaking. His chest felt too tight. The conversation kept replaying in his head, her tears, her accusations, her gratitude. All of it tangled up with the memory of Daniel Hale's face as the light left his eyes. Dad? Noah's head snapped up. Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, 9 years old and wearing Batman pajamas that were getting too small. His dark hair stuck up in 6 different directions, and he was squinting without his glasses. You okay? Ethan asked, because of course he could tell something was wrong. The kid had an uncanny ability to read Noah's moods. Fine, bud, just cold. Noah pushed off the door, forcing his shoulders to relax. How about waffles for breakfast? With chocolate chips? Don't push your luck. Ethan grinned and thundered back toward his room, already listing all the reasons chocolate chip waffles were perfectly acceptable for a Tuesday morning. Noah listened to his son's voice fade and tried to shake off the weight of the last 20 minutes, but he couldn't. Victoria's words kept echoing. I needed to know you were worth the faith Daniel put in you. Was he? Was any of this worth anything if he'd still failed to save the man who'd trusted him? Noah moved through the morning on autopilot, made waffles, helped Ethan find his math homework, signed a permission slip for a field trip to the science museum, drove his son to school and listened to him chatter about a book report due Friday. Normal dad things. Normal Tuesday morning routines. But his mind kept drifting back to Victoria on her porch, asking for the truth he'd been hiding, to the way her face had crumpled when he told her what Daniel said, to the accusation in her voice when she'd listed all the ways Noah had been taking care of her while pretending she didn't exist. He was still thinking about it when he pulled back into his driveway, and saw the envelope tucked into his screen door. Noah sat in his truck for a long moment, staring at that envelope like it might bite him. Then he grabbed it, went inside, and opened it at his kitchen table. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a young couple at the beach. Daniel Hale, looking younger and happier than he had in that warehouse, had his arm around Victoria. She was laughing at something off camera, her hair whipping in the wind. They looked so damn happy, it made Noah's chest ache. The note was brief. This is who he was before. I thought you should know. He wasn't just a name in a report or a voice in the dark. He was real. And so am I. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for carrying what he asked you to carry. I'm not asking you to stop feeling guilty. I know that's not something you can just turn off, but maybe we could both stop pretending the other person is a ghost. Your neighbor, Victoria. Noah set the note down carefully, like it might disintegrate if he handled it too roughly. The photograph stared up at him, Daniel and Victoria, frozen in a moment of uncomplicated joy. Before the warehouse, before the fire, before Noah became the link between their past and present. He should throw it away. Should put distance between himself and this woman who deliberately moved next door to the man who'd failed her husband. Should pack up Ethan and find a new place to live, somewhere Victoria Hale's green eyes couldn't find him. But Noah didn't move, just sat at his kitchen table, staring at a photograph of a dead man and his widow, and tried to figure out how to live with the weight of both of them. Outside, the morning continued without him. The sun rose fully. Traffic picked up on the main road 3 blocks over. The Hendersons' dog started barking at the mailman. Normal, mundane, Tuesday things. And next door, Victoria Hale probably sat at her own kitchen table, waiting to see if the bridge she'd tried to build would hold, or if Noah would burn it down like he'd burned all the others. He didn't know yet. Didn't know if he could do what she was asking. Didn't know if acknowledging her humanity meant forgiving his own failure. But for the first time in 8 months, Noah didn't immediately put the house up for sale. Didn't start planning his escape route. Didn't run. It wasn't much, but it was something. And maybe, for now, something was enough. 3 days passed before Noah saw Victoria again. 3 days of deliberate avoidance that felt different this time. Less like running, more like circling. He kept the photograph on his kitchen counter, moving it slightly each time he walked past, unable to throw it away but not ready to acknowledge what keeping it meant. Thursday afternoon found him in the garage, elbow deep in his truck's engine, when Ethan burst through the door with the kind of energy that usually meant trouble. "Dad, Mrs. Hale's gutter is hanging off her house." Noah's wrench slipped, barking his knuckles against metal. "What?" "The rain gutter thing. It's like dangling. Looks like it's gonna fall on her car." Of course it was. Of course the universe couldn't give him a full week to process before throwing them back together. Noah wiped his hands on a rag, buying time. "Did she ask for help?" "No, I just saw it when I was shooting hoops." Ethan was already halfway out the door again. "But we should fix it, right?" "That's what you always say. If you see something that needs fixing and you can fix it, you fix it." The kid had a point, and he'd used Noah's own words against him, which was particularly annoying. "Fine." Grab the extension ladder from the back. 10 minutes later, Noah stood in Victoria's driveway, ladder against his shoulder, trying not to think about the last time they'd spoken. Ethan had already knocked on her door because apparently his son had no sense of self-preservation when it came to neighborhood relations. The door opened. Victoria appeared in leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked younger somehow, less composed than she'd been on her porch 3 days ago. "Ethan says your gutter's about to fall," Noah said before she could speak. Victoria blinked, then followed Ethan's pointing finger to where a 10-foot section of aluminum hung at a precarious angle. "Oh, I didn't even notice. Probably came loose in that wind last night. I can fix it if you got some screws. Won't take long." He was already moving toward the side of the house, not giving her a chance to refuse or turn this into a conversation. Ethan bounded after him, chattering about the proper way to secure gutters like he'd done this 100 times instead of watching Noah do it. Victoria followed more slowly, her arms crossed against the cold. "You don't have to—" "Yeah, I do. Unless you want it to take out your windshield next time it storms." She went quiet, watching as Noah set up the ladder. He could feel her eyes on him, cataloging. probably wondering if this was penance or avoidance or just neighborly duty. He wasn't entirely sure himself. "Hand me that drill," Noah told Ethan, who immediately scrambled to help. The kid loved projects like this, loved feeling useful. Reminded Noah of himself at that age, always following his own father around, learning to fix things with his hands. The gutter repair took 20 minutes. Noah worked in silence, Ethan providing running commentary about his day at school, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling between the two adults. Victoria stood on her porch, occasionally disappearing inside and returning with something, a glass of water she didn't drink, her phone she didn't use, reasons to stay outside. When Noah climbed down and started packing up the tools, Ethan was already pestering Victoria about her garden plans for spring. The kid had no filter, never had, just asked whatever questions popped into his head. "You should plant tomatoes," Ethan announced with the authority of someone who'd never successfully grown a vegetable in his life. "My dad tried last year and they all died, but I bet you'd be better at it." "Thanks for that vote of confidence," Noah muttered. Victoria smiled, a real smile, the first one Noah had seen directed at him. "What happened to them?" "Dad forgot to water them. He's really bad at remembering stuff like that." "I got busy." "You forgot." Ethan turned back to Victoria. "He's good at fixing things, but bad at keeping things alive, except me. He's okay at keeping me alive." "High praise," Victoria said, and there was something warm in her voice that made Noah's chest tighten. "I'm standing right here," he pointed out. "We know, Dad. That's why we're talking about you instead of to you." Victoria laughed, actually laughed, and the sound hit Noah like a physical thing. He realized he'd never heard her laugh before. Not in 8 months of living next door, not in all the brief encounters and avoided conversations. It was a good laugh, unself-conscious and genuine, and it made her look like the woman in the photograph. Before. "Your son's got your number," Victoria said. "Yeah, well, he's 9. Give him a few years and he'll learn discretion." "I doubt it." Ethan grinned, completely unbothered by the assessment of his character. "Mrs. Hale, do you have any kids?" The question landed like a grenade. Noah saw Victoria's smile freeze, saw something shuddered drop behind her eyes. Ethan didn't notice, still chattering about how much fun it would be to have other kids on the block to play with. "No," Victoria said quietly. "I don't." "How come?" "Ethan," Noah's voice came out sharper than intended. "Help me with the ladder." "But I was just... now." Ethan finally caught the tone and went quiet, moving to grab the bottom of the ladder. Noah folded it down, hyper-aware of Victoria's silence. She'd wrapped her arms around herself again, that brief moment of lightness completely gone. They loaded the tools back into Noah's truck without speaking. Ethan kept shooting confused looks between the adults, smart enough to know he'd stepped in something but not sure what. "Go inside and start your homework," Noah told him. "It's not even for Ethan." The kid went, throwing one last apologetic look at Victoria before disappearing into the house. The door closed with a click that sounded too loud in the quiet afternoon. Noah stood in his driveway, tools scattered around him, and tried to think of what to say. Sorry felt inadequate. Explanation felt invasive. Silence felt cowardly. "We were going to," Victoria said suddenly, "have kids. We'd been trying for about a year when—" She stopped, shook her head. "Your son didn't know. It's fine." "He shouldn't have asked." "He's 9. 9-year-olds ask inappropriate questions. It's their job." Noah managed something that might have been a smile. "He's good at his job. He seems like a good kid." "He is. Too good sometimes. Makes me wonder how I got this lucky." Victoria's expression shifted, something unreadable moving across her face. "His mother?" "Took off when he was 2. Decided motherhood wasn't for her." Noah kept his voice neutral, stating facts without editorializing. "Haven't heard from her in 7 years. Her choice." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Ethan's better off. We're better off." He started gathering tools, needing something to do with his hands. "He asks about her sometimes. I tell him the truth. She wasn't ready to be a mom, and that's not his fault. Seems to be enough for now." "You're a good father." The words hit harder than they should have. Noah's hand stilled on a wrench. "I try." "No, you are. I've watched you with him. The way you make time even when you're exhausted. The way you listen when he talks. The way you show up." Victoria took a step closer, still maintaining distance but less than before. Daniel wanted to be a father. We'd picked out names, had a whole nursery planned. He was going to teach them to sail, even though he was terrible at it himself. Noah didn't know what to do with this information, didn't know where to file it in the already overcrowded space Daniel Hale occupied in his head. We were going to wait until after Italy, Victoria continued. One last big trip, just the two of us, before everything changed. And then she made a gesture that encompassed everything, the fire, the loss, the after. I'm sorry, Noah said, because what else was there? Everyone's sorry. The lawyers were sorry. The insurance company was sorry. The warehouse owners were so very sorry, but sorry doesn't... She cut herself off, jaw tight. Sorry doesn't bring anyone back. No, it doesn't. They stood there as the afternoon light slanted through the trees, painting everything in amber and shadow. Down the street, someone was mowing their lawn even though it was too early in the season. The smell of cut grass carried on the wind. The photograph, Noah heard himself say. The one you left. I kept it. Victoria's eyes met his. I wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure either, but I did. Why? Noah thought about that. About the young couple frozen in a moment of happiness, about the weight of carrying someone's last words, about the impossible task of moving forward when the past kept pulling you back. Because you were right, he said finally. He wasn't just a name in a report, and neither are you. Something in Victoria's posture softened. That's the longest conversation we've had without you trying to escape. I'm not trying to escape. You're standing next to your truck with the door open. Noah looked down. She was right. His hand was already on the door handle, body angled for a quick exit. He forced himself to step away, to close the door, to stay. Old habits, he said. I get it, this is... Victoria gestured between them. This is weird. There's no handbook for how to navigate the relationship between a widow and the firefighter who couldn't save her husband. If there was, I missed that training day. A small smile tugged at her mouth. Me too. The moment stretched, neither quite comfortable nor entirely unbearable. Just two people standing in a driveway, trying to figure out how to be in proximity without drowning. I should... Noah started. Wait. Victoria's hand came up, then dropped. I need to tell you something about why I really moved here. Noah's stomach dropped. You already told me. Not all of it. She took a breath, seeming to gather courage. The report gave me your name, but the report didn't tell me that you requested a transfer 3 months after the fire, or that you started seeing a department therapist, or that you almost quit entirely. How do you know that? Because I made it my business to know. No apology in her voice, just flat honesty. I hired someone to look into you, a private investigator. I needed to understand who you were before I moved my entire life to this town. The admission should have made him angry, should have felt like a violation, but all Noah felt was a strange sort of inevitability, like of course she'd done that. Of course she'd needed to know. What did they find? That you're 32, that you've been with the fire department for 9 years, that you have an exemplary record except for one incident where you disobeyed a direct order and nearly got yourself killed. Victoria's eyes stayed steady on his. That incident being the warehouse fire, that you took 3 months leave afterward, that when you came back, you requested transfer to a different station so you wouldn't have to work with the crew who'd been there that day. They didn't do anything wrong. Neither did you. I disobeyed orders. You tried to save someone. Her voice rose slightly, passion breaking through. You went into a collapsing building against orders because there was a person trapped inside. That's not something to be ashamed of. I should have gotten him out. The building was coming down. The fire was out of control. The structural supports were compromised. You did everything humanly possible. It wasn't enough. No, Victoria agreed, and the acknowledgement was somehow worse than argument. It wasn't enough. He still died, and you still carry that, but Noah... She took another step closer. The fact that you carry it, the fact that it still hurts, the fact that you can't look at me without seeing him, that tells me my husband's last moments mattered to someone besides me. That someone gave enough of a damn to let it destroy them a little. Noah's throat worked. I'm not destroyed. You're standing in your driveway at 4 in the afternoon, covered in grease, looking at me like I'm going to evaporate if you blink too hard. You've spent 8 months avoiding me, even though we live 20 feet apart. You fix my house in the middle of the night and leave groceries on my porch and shovel my driveway because you can't save Daniel, but maybe you can save me from a slippery sidewalk." Her voice cracked. "If that's not destroyed, I don't know what is." The words hung between them, too honest and too raw to take back. "What do you want from me?" Noah asked, the same question he'd thrown at her 3 days ago. But this time it came out different, less defensive, more genuine. "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "I thought I did. I thought I wanted to know you, to understand you, to find some kind of peace in knowing the man who stayed with Daniel was good and decent and worth the faith he put in you." She paused. "But then I got here and you wouldn't even look at me, and I realized I wanted more than that. I wanted—" She stopped, searching for words. "I wanted to not be alone in this anymore." "You're not alone." "Yes, I am. Everyone else has moved on. My friends stopped calling after the first year because they didn't know what to say anymore. My family wants me to sell the house Daniel and I bought, start fresh somewhere new, maybe try dating again. They mean well, but they don't understand that I'm not trying to move on. I'm trying to figure out how to move forward while carrying him with me." Noah understood that, understood it in his bones, in the way he still couldn't throw away the report from that day, couldn't pack up the gear he'd been wearing, couldn't stop replaying every decision and wondering if a different choice would have changed the outcome. "I get it," he said quietly. "I know you do. That's why I'm here. That's why I bought this house and learned your schedule and kept trying even when you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me." Victoria's hands twisted together. "I needed someone who understood that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry, and you're carrying Daniel too, whether you want to or not." She was right. He'd been carrying Daniel Hale for 2 years, the weight of him pressing down every time Noah put on his gear, every time he responded to a call, every time he looked at his own son and thought about the father who'd never make it home. "I don't know how to do this," Noah said. "Whatever this is, I don't know how to be around you without feeling like I'm failing him all over again. Then we figure it out together." Victoria's voice steadied, determination replacing vulnerability. "Because I'm not going anywhere, Noah. I bought this house. I'm staying, and you can keep avoiding me, keep running every time we're in the same space, keep fixing my house at 3 a.m. like some kind of guilt-ridden ghost. Or we can try to actually talk about this, about him, about what happened, about how we both live with it." Noah wanted to say no, wanted to retreat back into avoidance and midnight repairs and the careful distance he'd maintained for 8 months. But standing there in the slanting afternoon light, watching Victoria hold his gaze with the kind of courage it took to demand honesty from someone who'd rather bleed than speak, he couldn't make himself do it. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Okay? Yeah, okay, we can try." Victoria's shoulders dropped like she'd been holding tension for weeks. "I wasn't sure you'd agree." "I wasn't sure either." A laugh escaped her, short and sharp. "We're a mess." "Yeah, we are." The admission felt like permission somehow. Permission to be broken and trying instead of pretending to be fine. Permission to acknowledge that this thing between them, whatever it was, defied easy categorization. "I should check on Ethan," Noah said, because the moment was getting too heavy and he needed air. "Right, yeah." Victoria stepped back, creating space. "Thank you for the gutter." "It's just a gutter." "It's not, though. Is it?" No, it wasn't. They both knew it. Just like the shoveled driveway wasn't just a driveway, and the fixed fence wasn't just a fence. They were small acts of care from someone who couldn't figure out how else to express the weight of what he carried. Noah made it halfway to his door before Victoria called out, "Noah?" He turned back. "Tomorrow's Friday. I usually make too much dinner on Fridays because I haven't adjusted to cooking for one." She was trying for casual, but he could hear the effort underneath. "If you and Ethan wanted to come over around 6, I'd have food. We could eat, talk, or not talk. Whatever works." Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to make an excuse about shift schedules or prior plans or anything that would maintain the safe distance he'd worked so hard to build. But he just agreed to try, and trying meant saying yes to things that terrified him. "What kind of food?" A smile ghosted across Victoria's face. "What does Ethan like?" "Anything except mushrooms. Kid's got a thing about mushrooms." "No mushrooms, got it." 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock. Noah nodded once and went inside before he could change his mind. The door closed behind him, and he leaned against it, his heart hammering like he'd just run a marathon. Dad? Ethan's voice floated down from upstairs. Did you fix Mrs. Hale's gutter? Yeah, bud. Cool. Hey, do I have to do all this math homework or can I just do the even problems? All of it. Groaning filtered down, followed by the sound of Ethan dramatically throwing himself onto his bed. Normal kid sounds. Normal Friday approaching sounds. Everything normal except the agreement Noah had just made to have dinner with the widow of the man he couldn't save. He pushed off the door and went to make coffee, even though it was late afternoon and caffeine was probably the last thing he needed. The photograph was still on the counter where he'd left it. Daniel and Victoria at the beach, frozen in time, unaware of everything coming. Noah picked it up, studying the man's face, trying to reconcile the laughing figure in the photo with the dying one he'd held. They were the same person, but they felt completely different. One was a stranger's idea of a good day. The other was burned into Noah's memory with permanent ink. I don't know if I can do this, he said to the photograph, feeling ridiculous but needing to say it out loud. I don't know how to sit across from her and eat dinner and pretend I don't see you every time I look at her face. The photograph didn't answer. Photographs never did. But saying the words out loud made them feel less impossible somehow. Like naming the fear gave him power over it instead of the other way around. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his friend at the station. Still on for poker Sunday? Noah had forgotten about poker night, had forgotten about most things beyond the tight circle of work and Ethan and avoiding Victoria. The world had narrowed to just those things, and now it was expanding again whether he was ready or not. Yeah, I'll bring beer. You good? Marcus had been asking that question a lot lately. Had noticed the ways Noah had withdrawn, gotten quieter, stopped showing up to things. Good friends did that. Noticed when you were drowning, even when you worked hard to hide it. Getting there, Noah typed back. It wasn't entirely a lie. He wasn't good. Wasn't sure he'd know how to be good anymore. But he was trying, and maybe that counted for something. The next 24 hours passed in a strange state of anticipation. Noah went through the motions, got Ethan to school, ran errands, did laundry, fixed the leaky faucet he'd been ignoring for 3 weeks. Normal Friday things. But underneath it all ran a current of anxiety about the dinner he'd agreed to. He changed his shirt 3 times before Ethan called him out. Dad, it's just Mrs. Hale. Why are you being weird? I'm not being weird. You're wearing the shirt Grandma got you for Christmas. You hate that shirt. Noah looked down at the button-up he'd somehow put on. Ethan was right. He did hate this shirt. He changed back into a regular t-shirt and jeans, then immediately second-guessed that choice too. This is painful to watch, Ethan announced from the doorway. Just wear the blue one. It's fine. Everything's fine. Can we go? I'm hungry. At 6:02, Noah knocked on Victoria's door with Ethan bouncing beside him, completely oblivious to his father's internal crisis. The door opened almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. Victoria had changed too. Different sweater, hair down. She looked nervous, which made Noah feel slightly better about his own anxiety. Hey, she said. Hey, you're late. 2 minutes. I noticed. They stared at each other for a beat too long before Ethan pushed past both of them. Something smells really good. What are we having? The question broke the tension. Victoria laughed, stepping aside to let them in. Lasagna. Your dad said no mushrooms. He told you about my mushroom thing? Dad, that's embarrassing. You told her yourself yesterday, Noah pointed out. That's different. That was casual observation. This is premeditation. Victoria's house looked different from the inside than Noah had imagined during all those months of avoiding it. Warm. Lived in. Books everywhere. Photographs on the walls. Some of her and Daniel, others of places and people Noah didn't recognize. The furniture was nice, but not fussy. Everything felt chosen, deliberate, like each piece meant something. Dinner was awkward at first, all 3 of them too aware of the strangeness of the situation. But Ethan, bless him, filled the silence with running commentary about school and his latest obsession with space exploration and a detailed explanation of why Pluto should still be considered a planet. Noah watched Victoria engage with his son, asking questions, laughing at his jokes, treating him like a full person instead of just a kid. It made something in his chest loosen slightly. Your dad says you're good at math, Victoria said, passing Ethan more garlic bread. I'm okay. Better than him. I'm sitting right here, Noah said again. We know, Dad. We're being polite. Victoria grinned. How are you better than your dad? He can't help with my homework anymore. Got stuck on my pre-algebra last week and had to YouTube it. It's been 20 years since I took algebra, Noah defended. Excuses. Ethan turned back to Victoria. What about you? Are you good at math?
Used to be. Haven't thought about equations in a long time. What do you do? Like for work? The question made Victoria pause, fork halfway to her mouth.
I'm between things right now. I used to work in nonprofit development, fundraising, grant writing, that kind of thing. That sounds boring. Ethan. What? I'm just being honest. It could be boring, Victoria agreed, not offended, but it was good work. Helped people who needed help. I liked that part. Why'd you stop? Another pause, this one heavier. Noah could see her choosing her words carefully. I needed a break. Sometimes life throws you something hard, and you need time to figure out how to deal with it. Ethan considered this, then nodded like it made perfect sense. Like when my mom left. Dad took a break from work for a while. He doesn't like talking about it, but I remember. Noah's chest tightened. He'd forgotten how much kids noticed, how much they stored away. That must have been hard, Victoria said gently. It was okay. I was little. Dad says it's better this way because now it's just us, and we don't have to share the remote. Silver lining, Noah managed. After dinner, Ethan convinced Victoria to show him her books, leaving Noah to clean up the kitchen. He did it slowly, listening to their voices drift from the living room, Ethan's excited chatter mixing with Victoria's quieter responses. This was strange. All of it. Being in her house, eating food she'd made, watching his son laugh with the widow of a man who'd died in Noah's arms. It should have felt wrong, but somehow it didn't. It just felt different. Your kid's smart, Victoria said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. Really smart. He asked me about quantum physics. I had to admit I knew nothing. He goes through phases. Last month it was marine biology. Month before that, ancient Egypt.
What's he going to be when he grows up? Everything, apparently. Noah dried the last plate, set it in the rack. Or a firefighter. He says that sometimes. Scares the hell out of me. Because of the danger? Because of days like... Noah stopped himself, but Victoria knew where the sentence was going. Because of Daniel, she finished. Yeah. They stood in her kitchen, the comfortable sounds of Ethan exploring her bookshelves floating in from the other room, and faced the thing they'd both been dancing around. Can I ask you something? Victoria's voice was soft but steady. About that day? Noah's hands gripped the edge of the counter. Maybe not tonight. We're doing okay right now. I don't want to ruin it, Victoria finished. I get that. But Noah, we can't just pretend it didn't happen. We can't sit here eating lasagna and talking about Pluto and act like there isn't this massive thing between us. Why not? Other people do it. Other people have normal dinners without dragging up trauma. We're not other people. She moved closer, not touching but present. And this isn't normal. It never will be. But maybe it doesn't have to be. Before Noah could respond, Ethan bounced back into the kitchen. Mrs. Hale has a first edition of Foundation. That's like super rare. Can we come back so I can read it? That's up to Mrs. Hale, Noah said, grateful for the interruption and hating himself for being grateful. You can borrow it, Victoria offered. Really? Really. But you have to take care of it. I will. I promise. Dad, can we go? I want to start reading it tonight. Noah looked at Victoria, who nodded. The evening was ending. They'd made it through. Awkward, yes. Uncomfortable in places, definitely. But they'd made it through. Thank you for dinner, Noah said at the door. Thank you for coming, for bringing Ethan, for... Victoria glanced at the kid, who was already absorbed in the book. For trying. Yeah, we'll do it again maybe. I'd like that. Walking back across the yard, Ethan chattering about Asimov and robots and psychohistory, Noah felt something shift inside him. Not healing, not anywhere close to that, but maybe the first crack in the wall he'd built between himself and the possibility that this might not destroy him after all. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Noah sat on his porch with coffee and watched Victoria's lights click off one by one. He thought about dinner, about Ethan's easy acceptance of her, about the way she'd looked when she talked about needing a break from life. They were both broken by the same tragedy.
both trying to figure out how to keep living while carrying someone who wasn't here anymore. And maybe, there was something in that shared understanding that neither of them could find anywhere else. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for tonight. It meant more than you know." Noah stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Same. See you around." It wasn't much, but it was honest. And for now, honest was all he had to give.
The rhythm between them changed after that dinner. Not dramatically, neither of them was ready for dramatic, but in small ways that accumulated like snow. Victoria started waving when she saw Noah's truck pull in. He stopped pretending he didn't see her. Ethan borrowed 3 more books and returned them with handwritten reviews that made Victoria laugh. Once, she brought over leftover soup when Ethan had a cold, and Noah didn't leave it on the porch to go cold. 2 weeks passed like this. Careful. Tentative. Like 2 people learning to walk on ice that might crack at any moment. Then the letter came. Noah found it wedged in his screen door on a Tuesday afternoon, official letterhead from Morrison & Associates, attorneys at law. His stomach dropped before he even opened it. Nothing good ever came in envelopes like this. He read it standing in his driveway, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "Dear Mr. Carter, we represent Cascade Properties, LLC, in the matter of the warehouse fire that occurred on March 15th, 2 years ago. As you may be aware, Mrs. Victoria Hale has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against our client. Your name appears extensively in the incident report, and we believe your testimony will be crucial in establishing the facts of this case. We would like to schedule a deposition at your earliest convenience to discuss the events of that morning, including the decisions made by fire department personnel that may have contributed to the unfortunate outcome." The words blurred. Decisions made. Contributed to. They were setting up to blame the fire department. Blame him. Noah's hand crushed the letter before he realized he was doing it. His breath came short and sharp, the edges of his vision going fuzzy. Not now. He couldn't fall apart now. Ethan was inside doing homework. Everything was supposed to be normal. "Noah?" He spun around. Victoria stood at the edge of his driveway, holding her mail. One look at his face and her expression shifted. What happened? He couldn't speak, just held out the crumpled letter. She took it, smoothed it out, read it. He watched her face go through several emotions: confusion, recognition, anger. "Those bastards," she said quietly. "You're suing them?" "Yes. Have been for 6 months." Victoria's jaw tightened. They're the ones who cut corners, who ignored safety inspections, who stored flammable materials in a building that should have been condemned. They killed Daniel, and they've been hiding behind lawyers ever since. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't think—" She stopped, looking at the letter again. "I didn't think they'd drag you into it. The lawsuit is about their negligence, not the fire department's response. They're making it about the response." Noah's voice came out flat. "They want me to testify about decisions made, about whether we could have done something different." "Don't." Victoria stepped closer. "Don't go. Don't talk to them. They're just fishing for something to shift blame." "I have to. If they subpoena me, then we get you a lawyer. We fight it. But Noah, you don't owe these people anything." He laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "I owe your husband everything. I made him a promise I couldn't keep. If testifying helps your case, it won't help. They'll twist everything you say, make it sound like the fire department was incompetent or reckless. They'll use you to avoid accountability." Her hand found his arm, gripping tight. "Please, don't let them do this to you." Noah looked down at her hand on his arm, the first time she deliberately touched him. Her fingers were small against his forearm, but her grip was iron. What if they're right? The question came out before he could stop it. What if I did make the wrong call? What if staying with him instead of getting help faster? "Stop. Just stop." Victoria's voice went hard. "I've read that report until I can recite it in my sleep. You did everything right, everything possible. The building was already coming down. The fire was out of control. You stayed because leaving him alone would have been cruel, not because it was the wrong tactical decision." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because I've spent 2 years picking apart every second of that morning, and I know exactly who's responsible. It's not you." A car passed on the street. The Hendersons' dog started barking.
Normal afternoon sounds that felt completely disconnected from the conversation they were having. I need to think, Noah said, pulling away gently. I can't do this right now. He went inside before Victoria could respond, closing the door on her worried expression. Inside, Ethan was sprawled on the couch with his math book, oblivious. Noah went straight to the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and tried to remember how to breathe. The deposition request sat like a grenade in his pocket for 3 days. Noah didn't respond, didn't call a lawyer, didn't talk to Victoria even though he could feel her watching his house, waiting. He went to work, came home, went through the motions, and tried not to think about lawyers dissecting the worst day of his life. On Friday, a man in an expensive suit knocked on his door. "Mr. Carter, I'm Richard Morrison. I believe you received our letter?" Noah stared at him through the screen door. Mid-50s, gray hair, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything about him screamed expensive lawyer. "I'm not interested. I understand this is difficult, but Mrs. Hale's lawsuit has put a lot of good people at risk. Cascade Properties employs over 200 people. If this suit succeeds, many of them could lose their jobs." "That's not my problem, isn't it? You're a public servant. You understand the importance of protecting the community." Morrison's voice stayed smooth, reasonable. "We're not trying to blame anyone. We just want to establish the facts. Your testimony could help clarify the timeline, the decisions made, the challenges faced. That's all." The challenge was a building full of fire and a man trapped under debris. "That clear enough for you?" Something flickered in Morrison's expression. "May I come in? This conversation would be better held privately." "No, we're done." Noah started to close the door, but Morrison put his hand up. "Mr. Carter, I'm trying to be respectful here, but we can compel your testimony if necessary. Wouldn't it be easier to cooperate voluntarily? Get off my property." Think about what you're protecting. Mrs. Hale may seem sympathetic, but this lawsuit is about money. She's a wealthy woman seeking to destroy a company because she needs someone to blame for a tragic accident. It wasn't an accident. The words came out low and dangerous. And she's not doing this for money. How would you know? Have you two discussed the case? Morrison's eyes sharpened. Because that could be problematic. A first responder and a plaintiff having private conversations about ongoing litigation. We're neighbors. We've had dinner. That's it. Still, the appearance of impropriety. Dad? Both men turned. Ethan stood in the hallway, hair wet from the shower, looking between them with concern. "Who's that?" "No one," Noah said. "Go back upstairs." "But upstairs. Now." Ethan went, but slowly, throwing looks over his shoulder. Morrison watched him go, then turned back to Noah with that same smooth smile. "Cute kid. Must be hard raising him alone. Fire department salary doesn't leave much room for extras, I'd imagine." The threat was subtle but clear. Noah's hand tightened on the doorframe. "You need to leave. I'm just saying, cooperating with our investigation could be beneficial. We're reasonable people. We understand the financial pressures of single parenthood." "Are you offering me money?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to help establish the truth while securing your son's future. That's all. Get the hell off my property before I call the police." Morrison's smile finally fell away. "You're making a mistake. We'll be in touch." He walked to a black sedan parked at the curb, unhurried and confident. Noah watched him drive away, his whole body shaking with rage he couldn't quite control. The door next door slammed. Victoria appeared on her porch, face flushed. Did that lawyer just try to bribe you?" "You were listening?" "My window was open. I heard voices. Noah, if he offered you money, He implied it, didn't say it outright. Too smart for that." Noah stepped out onto his porch, needing air. "They're going to subpoena me, Terry. They're going to put me on the stand and make it sound like the fire department killed your husband." "Then we fight back." Victoria came down her steps, crossed into his yard without hesitation. "We get you a lawyer. We prepare. We don't let them twist this into something it wasn't." "Victoria." "No. Listen to me. These people are vultures. They've been doing this for 2 years, deflecting, delaying, trying to bury the truth under paperwork and technicalities. They know they're responsible. They know their negligence killed Daniel and could have killed you too, so they're scrambling for anyone else to blame. Maybe they're right to look at the response. Maybe if we'd... Victoria grabbed his shirt, surprising him. "Stop doing that. Stop taking responsibility for things you couldn't control. The warehouse was a death trap. The owners knew it. The inspectors documented it. The only reason Daniel was in there was because they lied about fixing the electrical. You didn't kill him. They did. I couldn't save him. No one could have saved him. The building was already collapsing when you arrived. Any other firefighter would have evacuated. But you stayed. You held his hand. You listened to him talk about me. You promised to tell me what he said. Her voice cracked. You gave him comfort in the worst moment of his life, and these bastards want to turn that into negligence. Noah's throat closed. He'd spent 2 years carrying the weight of that promise, the failure of it, the impossibility of it. Hearing Victoria reframe it as something other than failure felt wrong. Felt like letting himself off a hook he deserved to hang on. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to stand in front of lawyers and defend decisions I'm not sure were right. Then tell the truth. That's all. Just tell the truth about what you saw, what you did, what was possible in that moment. The truth is on our side. A car pulled up to the curb. Another sedan, this one gray. Noah's stomach sank. You expecting someone? He asked Victoria. She turned, then went pale. Oh no. A woman got out. Late 40s, severe suit, briefcase. She looked at Victoria with an expression somewhere between pity and frustration. Victoria, we need to talk. Not now, Susan. Yes, now. You've ignored my calls all week. The woman, Susan, glanced at Noah, then back to Victoria. Is this him, the firefighter? Susan, this isn't the time. Morrison called me an hour ago, said you've been coordinating with a witness, said there might be grounds for dismissal based on improper contact. Victoria's face flushed. That's ridiculous. Noah and I are neighbors. We haven't discussed the case. Haven't you? Susan's eyebrow arched. Because from what Morrison described, you two seem quite close. Dinners, his son borrowing books, you defending him to opposing counsel. I didn't defend him. I told Morrison to get lost. Which he's now using to claim you're coaching a witness. Susan's voice stayed level, professional, but Noah could hear the tension underneath. Victoria, I told you buying the house next to Mr. Carter was a bad idea. I told you it could compromise the case, but you insisted, and now what? Now I'm supposed to ignore the one person who actually understands what I'm going through? Pretend he doesn't exist? Yes. That's exactly what you should do until this case is resolved. The words hit Noah like a slap. Victoria's face went white. Susan, I'm serious. If you want to win this case, you need to establish distance. No more dinners, no more casual conversations. Definitely no more defending him to opposing counsel. He's my neighbor. He's a witness in your wrongful death lawsuit. There's a difference. Susan finally looked at Noah directly. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I know this is awkward, but Victoria's case is at a critical juncture. Any appearance of impropriety could tank 2 years of work. I haven't told her anything about the case, Noah said, finding his voice. It doesn't matter. Morrison will make it look like you have. He'll suggest you're testifying to help her rather than telling the truth. He'll use your relationship to undermine your credibility. We don't have a relationship. The words came out harsher than intended. Victoria flinched. Susan nodded like he'd just proven her point. Good. Keep it that way. She turned back to Victoria. I need you to sign some affidavits, stating you haven't discussed the case with Mr. Carter or any other witnesses. Can you do that? Yes, Victoria said quietly, and after that I need you to maintain distance until the trial is over. No contact except what's absolutely necessary as neighbors. Can you do that too? Victoria's eyes met Noah's. He saw something breaking in them, something that had just started to heal now being torn open again. Yes, she said again, even quieter. Good. Let's go inside and handle the paperwork. Susan walked toward Victoria's house without waiting for confirmation. Victoria didn't move immediately, still looking at Noah. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. She's right. This is complicated enough without... Noah stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Without what? Without them trying to be something they probably shouldn't be anyway? I didn't mean for this to happen. I know. I just wanted to know you, to understand. I didn't think about how it would look. Victoria, Susan's voice carried from the porch. Now. Victoria turned to go, then stopped. The deposition. If they subpoena you, just tell the truth. That's all you have to do. Tell the truth about what happened. What if the truth makes your case harder? Then it makes it harder, but it's still the truth. She managed a small smile. Daniel would want that. The truth, not some sanitized version designed to win a lawsuit. She walked away before Noah could respond, disappearing into her house with Susan. The door closed with a finality that felt like an ending. Noah stood in his yard, the afternoon sun beating down, and felt the fragile thing they'd been building collapse. 2 weeks of dinners and borrowed books and careful conversations, all of it swept away because lawyers needed clean narratives and witnesses who didn't complicate the story. He went inside. Ethan was on the stairs, obviously having listened to everything. That lawyer was a jerk, Ethan announced. Yeah, he was. Are you in trouble? No, just complicated. Noah ruffled his son's hair. Don't worry about it. Is Mrs. Hale in trouble? Kind of, but she'll be okay. Are you still friends? The question was so simple, so direct. Noah didn't have a simple answer. I don't know, bud. It's complicated. Adults say that a lot when they mean things are messed up. Yeah, we do. Ethan studied him with eyes too wise for 9 years old. I liked having dinner there. She's nice, and her books are really good. I know. It's dumb that lawyers can tell people not to be friends. Yeah, it is. But dumb or not, it was reality. Noah watched through the window as Susan's car eventually left, Victoria standing on her porch, looking small and tired. She didn't look toward his house, just went inside and closed the door. The subpoena arrived 3 days later. Official, unavoidable, exactly what Noah had been dreading. He was ordered to appear for a deposition in 2 weeks, to answer questions about the warehouse fire, the response, the decisions made. Everything. He called the fire chief first. They're deposing half the crew, Chief Martinez said, frustration clear in his voice. Trying to build a case that we were negligent. It's bullshit, but we have to take it seriously. I'm arranging union lawyers for everyone. What do they want me to say? The truth. Nothing more, nothing less. You followed protocol. You made the right calls given the circumstances. Don't let them twist it into something else. But how could Noah explain that staying with Daniel felt like both the right call and the wrong one? That protocol said evacuate, but humanity said stay? That 2 years later he still didn't know if choosing comfort over tactics had been heroism or selfishness? The union lawyer called next day. Patricia Chen, sharp and no-nonsense, who spent an hour on the phone walking Noah through what to expect. They'll ask about your training, your experience, the timeline of events. They'll try to get you to second-guess your decisions. Don't let them. You did everything by the book. I disobeyed an evacuation order. Silence on the line. Then, did you? Captain ordered everyone out. I stayed. Because there was a viable victim who needed immediate assistance. Because leaving him alone felt wrong. Mr. Carter, Patricia's voice gentled slightly. Firefighters make judgment calls every day. You assessed the situation and determined that the victim needed someone with him more than you needed to follow a general evacuation order. That's not disobedience. That's discretion. The building collapsed 10 minutes later. I almost died. But you didn't. And neither did your fellow firefighters because you were the only one who stayed. One person making a calculated risk is different from putting the whole crew in danger. Noah wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that his choice had been justified, but 2 years of guilt didn't evaporate because a lawyer said it should. The deposition was scheduled for a Monday. Noah spent the weekend in knots, going over the timeline in his head, trying to remember exactly what he'd done and why. Ethan noticed his distraction. You okay, Dad? Fine, just work stuff. Is it about the fire? The one where Mrs. Hale's husband died? Noah's head snapped up. What makes you ask that? I'm not stupid. I heard that lawyer, and Mrs. Hale hasn't come over in like a week, and you keep staring at her house when you think I'm not looking. Ethan, did you mess up at the fire? The question hit Noah in the chest. I tried my best. That's not what I asked. No, I didn't mess up, but someone died anyway, and that's hard to live with. Ethan processed this with his typical seriousness. Mom leaving wasn't your fault either. You know that, right? The sudden subject change threw Noah. What? Mom, you didn't mess up there either. She left because she wanted to, not because you did anything wrong. Grandma told me that. Your grandma needs to mind her business. But it's true, right? Sometimes bad things happen and it's nobody's fault. Noah pulled his son into a hug, this kid who was too smart and too perceptive and too good for the world. Yeah, bud, sometimes that's true. So maybe the fire was like that. Bad thing, nobody's fault, just sad. If only it were that simple. But Noah didn't say that. Just held his son and tried to believe that a 9-year-old might understand something he'd been missing for 2 years. Monday arrived with gray skies and cold rain. Noah put on his best shirt, the one he wore to funerals and court appearances, and drove to the law offices of Morrison and Associates. Patricia Chen met him in the parking lot. Remember, answer the question asked. Don't elaborate. Don't speculate. If you don't remember something, say so. If you need a break, ask for one. I'll be there the whole time. The deposition room was smaller than he expected. Morrison sat at one end of a long table, another lawyer beside him. A court reporter set up her machine. Patricia guided Noah to a chair across from them, close enough to see Morrison's expression. Calm, confident, like this was just another day at the office. The oath was administered. The questions started simple: name, rank, years of service. Then they moved into the morning of the fire. What time did you receive the call? 7:48 a.m. And what was the nature of the call? Structure fire? Commercial warehouse, possible occupant trapped inside. What was your role on Engine Company 5? Firefighter. Interior attack. Morrison made notes, nodding along. Then, when did you learn there was definitely someone trapped inside? When we arrived, someone from the site, a contractor, said the building owner had gone in to check the electrical. Did this contractor seem credible? I don't know what you mean. Did you verify his information before entering a potentially dangerous structure? Patricia leaned forward. The witness isn't responsible for scene verification. That's the incident commander's role. Morrison smiled. Of course. Mr. Carter, who was the incident commander that morning? Captain Reeves. And did Captain Reeves verify that someone was actually inside before ordering you in? He spoke to the contractor and made the call. So you entered base solely on second-hand information? We entered based on a report of a trapped victim. That's what we do. The questions continued, circling and probing. What was the building's condition when they arrived? What were the signs of structural integrity? At what point did Noah realize the building was unstable? The whole place felt wrong from the start, Noah admitted. The fire was burning too hot, spreading too fast. The supports looked compromised. Yet you went inside anyway. There was someone trapped, allegedly trapped, based on second-hand information from a contractor whose credibility you hadn't verified. Patricia interrupted. Mr. Morrison, are you seriously suggesting firefighters should delay response to verify reports? That's not how emergency response works. I'm suggesting that proper assessment could have prevented unnecessary risk. Unnecessary? Noah's voice went hard. Daniel Hale was in there. He was real. He was trapped. There was nothing unnecessary about trying to save him. Morrison's eyebrow arched. Daniel. You use his first name. Did you know the victim personally? Too late. Noah realized the trap. No. I learned his name later. From whom? The incident report. His wife. His wife, Victoria Hale. Your neighbor. Yes. The plaintiff in this lawsuit. Yes. Morrison leaned back, satisfied. How long have you known Mrs. Hale? Patricia jumped in. That's not relevant to the events of the fire. It's relevant to the witness's potential bias. Mr. Carter, when did you first meet Victoria Hale? Noah's jaw tightened. She moved in next door about 8 months ago. And you've developed a relationship with her? We're neighbors. Just neighbors? You haven't had dinner together? Your son hasn't borrowed books from her? How do you know that? I'm asking the questions, Mr. Carter. Have you had personal contact with the plaintiff in this case? Patricia's hand touched Noah's arm, a warning. You can answer yes or no. Yes, we've had contact. We're neighbors. That's normal. Is it normal for a witness to develop a close personal relationship with a plaintiff before testifying in her wrongful death lawsuit? We're not. Noah stopped, aware of how this looked. We're neighbors who've had a few conversations. That's all. Conversations about what? Regular neighbor stuff.
Including the fire that killed her husband? The fire you're here to testify about? No, we haven't discussed the case. Morrison pulled out a piece of paper. I have an affidavit here from a witness who overheard Mrs. Hale telling you to just tell the truth about the fire. That sounds like discussing the case to me.
Noah's stomach dropped. Someone had been listening. Someone had reported back. She was giving general advice, he managed, about testimony in a case she has a financial interest in. Mr. Carter, isn't it true that your testimony today is influenced by your personal relationship with the plaintiff? That you're here to help her win her lawsuit rather than provide objective facts? No. No. Then explain why a first responder would disobey a direct evacuation order unless he had a personal stake in the outcome. Explain why you'd risk your life for someone you'd never met unless you somehow knew it would benefit you later. The accusation was so absurd, so backwards, that Noah almost laughed. I stayed because leaving a dying man alone was wrong. I didn't know Victoria. Didn't know Daniel. Didn't know anything except that someone needed help and I could provide it. Help that ultimately failed. The words landed like a punch. Patricia started to object, but Noah cut her off. Yes, help that failed. I stayed with Daniel Hale while he died. I held his hand. I listened to him talk about his wife and their anniversary trip and how sorry he was. I promised him I'd get him out, and I couldn't keep that promise. None of that has anything to do with Victoria or her lawsuit. It has to do with the fact that I was there, and I tried, and it wasn't enough. The room went quiet. Morrison studied Noah with an expression that might have been calculation, or might have been something else. Why did you stay? He asked, voice softer now. Really, the building was collapsing. Your captain ordered evacuation. You had every reason to leave, so why stay? Noah thought about that morning. The smoke and heat and terror. Daniel's voice getting weaker. The impossible choice between duty and humanity. Because he was scared, Noah said finally, and alone, and dying, and I had the power to make sure he didn't die alone. That felt more important than following orders. More important than your own safety? Yes. More important than getting additional help that might have saved him? There was no additional help. The building was coming down. Help wasn't coming fast enough. All I could do was stay. Morrison made more notes. The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, recording every word for posterity. Patricia sat tense beside Noah, ready to object but holding back. Let's talk about the building's condition, Morrison said, shifting gears. You said it felt wrong from the start. Can you elaborate? The rest of the deposition blurred together. Questions about structural assessment, response protocols, communication with command, the timeline of collapse. Noah answered as honestly as he could, but every answer felt like it was being stored up as ammunition. 3 hours later, Morrison finally called a break. Patricia pulled Noah into a conference room down the hall. You did fine, she said, though her expression suggested otherwise. I screwed up. The stuff about Victoria was going to come out regardless. Morrison's been digging. He knows about the dinners, the books, all of it. How? Neighbors talk. Someone saw, someone told, someone got paid to report back. Doesn't matter. What matters is you told the truth in there. Your testimony supports that the building was unstable, that the response was appropriate, that no amount of different decisions would have changed the outcome. Then why do I feel like I just handed them ammunition? Because Morrison's good at making people feel that way. But the facts are on our side. The building was a death trap. Your testimony confirms that. They went back in. More questions, these ones more technical. Fire spread patterns, collapse indicators. Whether Noah had seen evidence of the safety violations Victoria's team had documented. I'm a firefighter, not a building inspector, Noah said when Morrison pushed too hard. I saw a fire. I saw a trapped victim. I saw a structure that was failing. That's what I can testify to. But you can't testify to whether your employer's response was adequate. I can testify that we did everything possible given the circumstances. Whether that's adequate is for someone else to judge. Morrison smiled. Indeed it is. The deposition ended at 4:30. Noah walked out feeling wrung dry, his head pounding from 3 hours of careful answers and legal traps. Patricia walked him to his truck. They're going to use the Victoria angle, she said, going to try to paint you as a biased witness. You need to be prepared for that. I told the truth. I know, but truth and perception aren't always the same thing in a courtroom. She paused. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, both at the fire and today. Not everyone could sit across from Morrison and stay that composed. Noah didn't feel composed, felt shredded, but he nodded and drove home in silence, replaying every answer and wondering which ones would come back to haunt him. Victoria was on her porch when he pulled in. She stood quickly, like she'd been waiting. Noah hesitated, remembering Susan's warning about distance. Then he got out of the truck anyway because he was tired of running. How was it? Victoria asked. About as bad as expected. Did they ask about us? Yeah. Used it to suggest I'm a biased witness, that my testimony is about helping you instead of stating facts. Victoria's face fell. I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't moved here, you had every right to move here. This isn't on you. But the case is about whether Cascade Properties was negligent. My relationship with you doesn't change the facts of what happened that morning. Morrison won't see it that way. Morrison can see it however he wants. The truth is the truth. They stood in the space between their houses, the same space where this had all started weeks ago, with Victoria demanding to know why Noah couldn't look at her. Now he could look at her just fine, could see the guilt and worry on her face, could see how much she blamed herself for dragging him into this. I told them everything, Noah said quietly, about the fire, about staying with Daniel, about what he said. All of it. Victoria's hand came up to her mouth. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Because it's the truth. And because Daniel deserves to have the truth told, even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard. What did you say? About what he said? Noah looked at this woman who'd bought a house next to a stranger because she needed to know him, who'd pushed through his walls and his guilt to demand honesty, who was fighting a legal battle against people who'd rather bury the truth than face it. That he loved you, Noah said, that you were all he could think about, that even dying, he was worried about missing your anniversary dinner, that he made me promise to tell you he was sorry. Tears tracked down Victoria's face, but she didn't look away. Thank you. For what? For saying it out loud, in an official proceeding, for making sure it's part of the record that Daniel died thinking of me, not work or money or any of the things Morrison wants to claim. Noah hadn't thought about it that way, hadn't considered that his testimony might be a gift to her instead of just legal obligation. He was a good man, Noah said. From what I could tell in 10 minutes, he deserved better than dying in that warehouse. Yes, he did. Victoria wiped at her face. But he got you. In the worst moment of his life, he got someone who stayed, someone who listened, someone who cared enough to carry his message for 2 years even when it hurt. I wish I could have saved him. I know. But since you couldn't, I'm glad you were there. Does that make sense? It did. Painful as it was, it did. They stood together as the afternoon faded into evening, two people bound by tragedy and trying to figure out how to move forward without forgetting, without betraying the man whose death had brought them together. Susan says we need to maintain distance until the trial, Victoria said eventually. I know. But after it's over. Noah thought about that. About dinners and borrowed books and Ethan's easy acceptance of her. About the way Victoria made him laugh despite everything. About how they understood each other's grief in ways no one else could. After, he said. We'll figure out after. It wasn't a promise, wasn't even really a plan, but it was enough to hold on to, enough to get through whatever came next. Victoria nodded and went inside. Noah did the same. And though they maintained careful distance for the lawyers and the case and all the people watching, something had shifted between them in that deposition room. Some barrier had fallen when Noah spoke Daniel's last words into an official record, making sure they couldn't be buried or forgotten. The truth was out now. For better or worse, it was out. And whatever happened next, they'd face it knowing they'd honored Daniel the best way they could, by refusing to let lawyers and money and legal maneuvering erase what had really happened in that warehouse 2 years ago. The trial date was set for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks of pretending Victoria didn't exist beyond polite waves and the occasional nod when their paths crossed getting mail. 6 weeks of Ethan asking why Mrs. Hale didn't come over anymore and Noah having no good answer. 6 weeks of watching her lights click on and off across the yard and remembering the sound of her laugh. Noah threw himself into work, pulled double shifts when he could, volunteered for the training rotations no one else wanted. Anything to keep his mind occupied and away from the approaching trial date that loomed like a storm on the horizon. 3 weeks before trial, Chief Martinez called him into the office. "Sit down, Carter." Noah sat, his stomach already sinking. Nothing good ever started with that tone. "Morrison's team has been circulating your deposition transcript, making noise about the department's response protocols, suggesting we were negligent in our assessment." Martinez rubbed his face tiredly. "City attorney wants to settle." "Settle what?" "Victoria's not suing the department." "No, but Cascade Properties is filing a cross-claim, saying if they're liable, we are too. Comparative negligence. They want to drag us down with them." Noah's hands curled into fists. "That's insane." "That's legal strategy. They can't win on the merits, so they're spreading the blame around. City doesn't want the publicity or the cost of defending, so they're considering a settlement that includes admitting partial fault." "We didn't do anything wrong." "I know that. You know that. But the city attorney sees dollar signs and bad press. Easier to pay out a small settlement than risk a jury trial." Martinez leaned forward. "I'm fighting it. The union's fighting it. But I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this goes sideways." "How sideways?" "Worst case, department admits fault as part of a settlement. Your personnel file gets flagged. Maybe a suspension. Maybe worse." The room tilted. "For what?" "For staying with a dying man. For disobeying an evacuation order. For creating unnecessary risk. For—" Martinez cut himself off, disgust clear on his face. "For doing the right thing in a way that's hard to defend in a courtroom." Noah stood abruptly, needing to move. "This is unbelievable. This is reality. Morrison's good at what he does, and what he does is find pressure points. He's pushing hard on the relationship between you and Victoria Hale, suggesting collusion, suggesting bias. The city doesn't want that narrative anywhere near them." "There's no collusion. We're neighbors who've had a few conversations. I believe you, but perception matters. And Morrison's planted enough doubt that people are asking questions." Martinez stood too, moved to the window overlooking the apparatus bay. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." "Okay." "Is there something between you and Mrs. Hale, beyond being neighbors?" The question hung in the air. Noah thought about dinners and borrowed books, and the way Victoria's eyes had looked when he told her what Daniel said. Thought about the photograph still on his kitchen counter, and the way his chest tightened every time he saw her on her porch. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. Eventually. But not now. Not during the case. We've been keeping distance like her lawyer asked." Martinez nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. But Carter, you need to understand how this looks from the outside. A firefighter gets emotionally involved with a widow from a call, starts a relationship with her, then testifies in her lawsuit. It's messy." "Life is messy." "Yeah, it is, but courtrooms prefer clean." Martinez turned back from the window. "I'm not saying stay away from her forever. I'm saying be aware that everything you do right now is being watched and cataloged and potentially used against both of you. The trial's in 3 weeks. Can you hold out that long?" "I've been holding out for 3 weeks already." "Good. Keep holding." "And Carter?" Martinez's voice softened. "For what it's worth, I don't think you did anything wrong. Not at the fire. Not with Mrs. Hale. But I've been doing this long enough to know that being right doesn't always matter. Sometimes you just have to survive the process." Noah left the station feeling hollowed out. The idea that his actions he'd spent 2 years agonizing over, might result in disciplinary action felt like a cosmic joke. He'd saved no one, failed the one promise that mattered, and now he might lose his job for the privilege of trying. He drove home on autopilot, pulled into his driveway, and sat there staring at nothing. Victoria's car was in her driveway. Her porch light was on. He could see her shadow moving past the window, just living her life, unaware of the latest development. Should he tell her? The city might settle, might admit fault that would undermine her case. She had a right to know. But telling her meant contact, meant conversation, meant exactly what Susan had warned against. Noah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes? Victoria." He stared at the message, alarm bells ringing. If anyone was monitoring their communications, this would look bad. But the urgency in her text overrode caution. "I'll be there." Riverside Park was mostly empty on a Tuesday evening. Noah spotted Victoria sitting on a bench near the water, hunched against the cold. He approached slowly, scanning for anyone who might be watching. Paranoid, maybe. But Morrison had proven he had eyes everywhere. "This is a bad idea," Noah said by way of greeting. "I know, Susan would kill me, but I needed to tell you in person." Victoria looked up, and her face was drawn with stress. "Morrison's team contacted me this morning. They're offering a settlement." Noah sat down, keeping distance between them on the bench. "What kind of settlement?" $15 million. They admit partial responsibility for the fire. No admission of criminal negligence. Case closed. It was a huge number, life-changing money. The kind of settlement most people would take without hesitation. "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it. But Noah..." She turned to face him fully. "The settlement includes a provision that all witnesses would be released from testimony, including you, including everyone from the fire department. The city would drop its cross-claim. You'd be clear." Understanding dawned. "They're using me as leverage. Settle the case and I don't face consequences for disobeying orders." "Yes." "What does Susan say?" "She says take it. Says $15 million is more than we'd likely get from a jury, and it protects everyone from further litigation." Victoria's hands twisted together. "She says I'd be stupid not to accept." "But you haven't." "No." "Why not?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow past. "Because it feels like letting them win. They killed Daniel through negligence and greed. They cut corners and ignored violations and created a death trap. And now they get to pay money and walk away without anyone calling it what it was, without it being in a public record that they were responsible. $15 million is a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of money. But money isn't responsibility. Money is just making a problem go away." She looked at him. "I didn't file this lawsuit for money. I filed it because someone needed to say out loud that Daniel died because people chose profit over safety, that his death was preventable, that it mattered. And a settlement doesn't say that? A settlement says everything and nothing. It's a business transaction. Daniel becomes a line item in their budget instead of a human being who died in terror because they couldn't be bothered to fix their sprinklers." Noah understood that, understood the need for public acknowledgement, for the truth to be spoken in a place where it couldn't be ignored or spun or buried. "But if you reject the settlement, I'm still on the hook. The city still faces the cross-claim. Everything gets messier." "I know. That's why I'm here. I need you to tell me what to do." Victoria, "No, listen. This case was supposed to be about justice for Daniel, about making sure what happened to him didn't happen to anyone else. But it's turning into something that hurts you, hurts the fire department, hurts everyone except the people actually responsible." Her voice cracked. "I don't know how to weigh Daniel's memory against your career, against your livelihood, against your ability to keep doing the work you do." Noah thought about that, about Daniel's last words and Victoria's grief and the warehouse owners who'd cut corners, about standing in a courtroom and telling the truth versus taking the settlement and letting it all fade into legal history. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Forget about me. Forget about consequences." "What does your gut say?" "That I want to watch Morrison's face when a jury finds his clients guilty of negligent homicide. I want it on record. I want Daniel's name attached to a verdict that says his death mattered and someone was held accountable." She wiped at her eyes. "But that's grief talking. Maybe rage. Maybe Susan's right and I'm being stubborn and stupid." "You're not stupid." "Then what am I?" "Someone who loved her husband and wants the world to acknowledge what was taken from you." "That's not stupid. That's human." They sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the river in shades of orange and purple. A couple walked past with a dog. Kids played on the swings in the distance. Normal evening things while they tried to make an impossible decision. "If you reject the settlement, I could lose my job," Noah said quietly. "City might settle separately and admit fault. I might get suspended or fired for disobeying orders." "I know." "And you'd still have to go to trial. Still have to face Morrison and his team trying to tear apart every aspect of Daniel's life and death. Still have to hear them argue that a fire that killed your husband was just an unfortunate accident." "I know that too." "But you want to do it anyway?" Victoria turned to look at him fully. "Do you think I'm wrong? Tell me honestly. If this were your decision, what would you do?"
Noah thought about the 2 years he'd spent carrying Daniel's last words, about the promise he'd made and broken, about the guilt that had shaped every day since. And he thought about the truth, the simple, clean truth that the warehouse had been a death trap, and someone needed to answer for it. I'd go to trial, he heard himself say. I'd risk everything to make sure the people responsible couldn't hide behind money and lawyers. Because Daniel deserves that. And because letting them win feels like killing him twice. Victoria's breath hitched. Even if it costs you your career? Even then, the truth matters more. You could refuse to testify, plead the fifth, protect yourself. I could, but I won't. Because I was there. I'm the one who heard what Daniel said. I'm the one who can put his humanity on record instead of letting him be reduced to a casualty statistic. Noah's hands clenched. Morrison wants to make this about protocols and response times and whether the fire department followed procedure. But it's not about that. It's about your husband dying in terror because someone chose profit over safety. And I'll be damned if I let that truth get buried in a settlement agreement. Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. You could lose everything. So could you. You're the one who has to stand up in court and relive the worst day of your life. You're the one Morrison will cross-examine and try to make look like a money-hungry widow. You're taking the bigger risk. We're both taking risks. Yeah, we are. They sat together as darkness fell. Two people bound by tragedy and choosing the hard path over the easy one. Finally, Victoria pulled out her phone. I should call Susan. Tell her my decision before I lose my nerve. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She stood, then hesitated. Noah? After this is over, after the trial, can we… Yeah, he said before she could finish. Whatever happens, yeah. She nodded and walked away, phone already to her ear. Noah sat on the bench a while longer, watching the river and wondering if he'd just made the stupidest decision of his life, or the first truly brave one.
His phone rang. Chief Martinez. I just got a call from the city attorney. Victoria Hale rejected the settlement. Trial's moving forward. A pause. I assume you knew about this? I knew she was considering it. Did you tell her to reject it? I told her to do what felt right. Martinez sighed. Carter, you just bet your career on a jury trial. I hope you know what you're doing. Me too, Chief. Me too. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Patricia Chen drilled Noah on testimony, running through every possible question Morrison might ask and how to answer without getting trapped. Susan put Victoria through the same process, preparing her for the emotional gauntlet of a trial. They didn't speak during those weeks, didn't even wave. The distance felt necessary now, a way to protect what little credibility they had left. But Noah felt the weight of her across the yard, knew she was going through the same sleepless nights and anxiety spirals. Ethan noticed, of course. Is Mrs. Hale mad at you? No, Bud, just complicated legal stuff. When will it be uncomplicated? After the trial. When's that? Next week. Ethan processed this with his typical seriousness. Are you scared? The question caught Noah off guard. Yeah, a little. Because you might get in trouble? Because I have to talk about hard things in front of a lot of people. Like the fire where Mrs. Hale's husband died? Yeah, like that. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, I think you're brave, Dad. Even if you're scared. The words lodged somewhere in Noah's chest. Thanks, Bud. Will Mrs. Hale be there at the trial? Yeah, she'll be there. Can you sit together? Probably not. We have to stay separate for legal reasons. That's dumb. Yeah, it is. But dumb or not, it was reality. And reality arrived with brutal efficiency when the trial began on a gray Monday morning in late March. The courthouse was downtown, old stone and marble that felt appropriately grave for the proceedings. Noah arrived early with Patricia, both of them dressed for court. He spotted Victoria across the lobby with Susan, and their eyes met for just a moment before both looked away. The courtroom filled slowly. Cascade Properties had a full legal team, 5 attorneys in expensive suits surrounding the executives who'd run the company when the warehouse burned. Morrison sat at the head of their table, confident and composed. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table with Susan and one associate. She looked small in that big chair,
vulnerable in a way that made Noah's protective instincts flare. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began.
Opening statements came first. Susan laid out the case methodically, the documented safety violations, the ignored inspection reports, the deliberate choice to store flammable materials in an unsafe structure. She painted a picture of corporate negligence that made the outcome inevitable. Morrison countered with a narrative about an unfortunate accident, about a building that met code at the time of construction, about a fire department response that was tragically inadequate to the situation. He spoke about Victoria's grief being understandable but misplaced, about the need to separate emotion from fact. And then he said the thing Noah had been dreading. The plaintiff wants you to believe this was simple negligence, but the evidence will show a more complicated story. A story involving a first responder who made questionable decisions under pressure. A story involving a widow who developed a personal relationship with that first responder and may be using this lawsuit to validate his actions rather than seeking true justice. Victoria's face went white. Susan stood immediately. Objection. Counsel is making assertions not in evidence and casting aspersions on the plaintiff's character. Sustained. The judge looked at Morrison over her glasses. Stick to facts, counselor. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. The suggestion of collusion, of improper relationship, of ulterior motives beyond justice for Daniel. The first week of trial was brutal. Cascade's attorneys called expert witnesses who testified about building codes and fire safety standards. They brought in an engineering professor who said the warehouse had been structurally sound before the fire. They presented internal memos showing that the company had addressed safety concerns, conveniently ignoring the ones they'd ignored. Susan countered with her own experts, a fire investigator who walked through every violation found in the post-incident inspection. A structural engineer who testified that the building should have been condemned years earlier. Former employees who admitted they'd reported safety issues that were dismissed. Noah watched from the gallery, not yet called to testify. He saw Victoria sit through testimony that reduced Daniel to a case study, watched her flinch when Morrison called her husband's death an unfortunate incident, like he'd tripped on a sidewalk instead of dying in agony. On day 6, they called their first eyewitness. The contractor who'd been on site that morning, the one who'd reported Daniel, was inside. "Did you see Mr. Hale enter the building?" Susan asked. "Yes, ma'am. He went in through the south entrance around 7:30. "Did you warn him about any safety concerns?" The contractor shifted uncomfortably. "I told him the electrical panel was acting up, that we were getting some weird readings." "Did you mention the building's overall condition?" "I said it was old, needed work, but the boss said we were just there to assess, not to do major repairs." Morrison took over on cross-examination. "Did Mr. Hale seem concerned about entering the building?" "No, sir. He seemed fine, confident." "So he made an informed decision to enter a structure he knew had issues?" Objection, speculation. Sustained. But again, the seed was planted. Daniel had chosen to enter, had known there were problems, the implication being that his death was partly his own fault. Victoria's hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles went white. Day 7 brought fire department witnesses. Captain Reeves testified about the response, the timeline, the decisions made. Morrison grilled him about the evacuation order. "You ordered all personnel to evacuate the structure, correct?" "Yes, when it became clear the building was unstable." "But one firefighter disobeyed that order, firefighter Noah Carter, correct?" "He stayed with the victim." "Against your direct order?" "Yes. In your professional opinion, did firefighter Carter's decision to disobey orders compromise the safety of the operation?" Reeves hesitated and Noah's stomach dropped. "It created additional risk." "Additional risk that could have resulted in 2 deaths instead of 1? Objection. Sustained. Rephrase. Did firefighter Carter's presence in the building after evacuation was ordered create a situation where other firefighters might have had to risk their lives to rescue him? Potentially, yes. Victoria turned in her seat, finding Noah in the gallery. Her expression was stricken, apologetic. He gave a slight shake of his head. "Not your fault." Day 8 was Noah's turn. Patricia had prepared him, but walking into that courtroom and taking the stand felt surreal. The oath was administered. He stated his name and occupation. And then Susan began her questioning. She started gentle, walking him through his background, his training, his experience. Then into the morning of the fire, the call, the response, the initial assessment. When did you locate Mr. Hale? Approximately 15 minutes after our arrival. He was trapped under debris near the center of the structure. What was his condition? Critical, crush injuries to his lower body, significant blood loss, difficulty breathing due to smoke inhalation. What did you do? I attempted to free him. The debris was too heavy. I called for additional equipment, but command had already ordered evacuation. The building was unstable. What happened next? Noah took a breath. I made the decision to stay with Mr. Hale rather than evacuate. Why? Because leaving him alone to die felt wrong, because he was conscious and terrified, and I had the ability to provide comfort, if not rescue. Did you believe you could save him? The question hung in the air. Noah thought about that morning, about the impossible weight of debris and the sound of the building groaning. No, he admitted. Not by the time I found him, but I hoped. I kept trying, and I stayed because hoping felt better than abandoning him. Susan walked him through those final minutes. What Daniel said, how he died, the collapse that came shortly after. Noah spoke it all into the record, making sure the jury understood that Daniel Hale had been a real person with a real life, not just a casualty number. Then Morrison stood for cross-examination, and the real fight began. Firefighter Carter, you testified that you disobeyed a direct evacuation order, is that correct? Yes. In your training, what's the protocol for evacuation orders? Follow them immediately. No exceptions? There can be judgment calls in extreme circumstances. And you judged that your personal feelings about leaving a victim alone outweighed your captain's professional assessment that the building was too dangerous to remain inside? Patricia stood. Objection. Mischaracterization. I'll rephrase. Firefighter Carter, did you prioritize emotional response over tactical training? Noah's jaw tightened. I prioritized a human life over protocol. Even though that protocol exists to save lives. Even though following that protocol meant Daniel Hale would die alone and terrified. But he died anyway, didn't he? The words landed like a slap. Noah's hands gripped the witness stand. Yes, he died anyway. So your decision to stay accomplished nothing except putting yourself at risk and potentially requiring other firefighters to rescue you? It accomplished making sure a dying man didn't spend his last moments alone. It accomplished letting him talk about his wife and their future. It accomplished giving him some small comfort in the worst moment of his life. How noble! Morrison's voice dripped with sarcasm. Tell me, Firefighter Carter, when did you first meet Victoria Hale? The subject change was abrupt, deliberate. About 8 months ago. After you'd read your name in the incident report for her husband's death? I don't know when she read the report. But you knew who she was when she moved in next door? Yes. And you developed a relationship with her? We became friendly neighbors. Just friendly? You've had dinner together multiple times. Your son has spent time in her home. You've repaired her property on numerous occasions. That sounds like more than just friendly. Patricia objected. The judge sustained it, but Morrison kept pushing. Isn't it true, Firefighter Carter, that your testimony today is influenced by your personal feelings for Mrs. Hale? That you're here to support her lawsuit rather than provide objective facts? No, I'm here to tell the truth about what happened to Daniel Hale. The truth as filtered through your relationship with his widow? The truth as I lived it, as I witnessed it, regardless of who's asking. Morrison smiled like Noah had just proven his point. No further questions. Noah left the stand feeling scraped raw. Victoria's eyes followed him as he returned to the gallery, her expression a mixture of gratitude and guilt. The trial continued. More experts, more testimony, more legal arguments that felt increasingly disconnected from the simple truth that Daniel had died because people chose profit over safety. On day 12, Victoria took the stand. Susan walked her through the basics, her marriage to Daniel, their life together, their plans for the future, then into the day of the fire, the call she received, the hospital, the devastating news. Mrs. Hale, why did you file this lawsuit? Victoria's voice was steady despite the tears on her face. Because my husband died in a preventable tragedy. Because the people responsible tried to hide behind lawyers and money instead of taking accountability. Because I needed the truth to be spoken out loud in a place where it couldn't be ignored.
Is this lawsuit about money? No, it's about justice. It's about making sure Daniel's death meant something, that it led to change so no one else's husband dies the same way. Then Morrison stood and Noah's stomach dropped. He was brutal. Questioned her about the settlement she'd rejected, suggested she was motivated by vengeance rather than justice, implied that her relationship with Noah had clouded her judgment. Mrs. Hale, you moved next door to firefighter Carter deliberately, correct? Yes. Why? Because he was with my husband when he died. Because I needed to know the man who stayed. And you developed feelings for him. Victoria hesitated. I developed respect for him, gratitude, friendship. Just friendship. You've spent considerable time together. Your lives have become intertwined. Isn't it true that this lawsuit is as much about validating firefighter Carter's actions as seeking justice for your husband? No, that's not true. Then explain why you bought a house next to a man involved in your husband's death. Explain why you've spent months cultivating a relationship with a key witness. Explain why you rejected a $15 million settlement that would have spared everyone this trial. I rejected the settlement because money doesn't bring my husband back. It doesn't change the fact that he died because your clients cut corners. And my relationship with Noah Carter has nothing to do with this case. He's a good man who did his best in an impossible situation. That's separate from your client's negligence. Is it? Or have you convinced yourself that firefighter Carter is blameless because you're emotionally involved with him? Objection. Susan was on her feet, voice sharp. Counsel is badgering the witness and making assertions not in evidence. Sustained. Mr. Morrison, move on. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the implication, the suggestion that Victoria's judgment was compromised, that her motives were suspect, that this was about something other than justice for Daniel. When Victoria finally left the stand, she looked destroyed. Noah wanted to go to her, wanted to say something, but they were still in the middle of trial, still performing distance for the cameras and the jury and everyone watching. That night, he broke the rules and called her. Are you okay? Victoria's voice was thick with tears. I ruined it. Morrison made me look like some grief-stricken widow who can't think straight. The jury probably thinks I'm using this trial to validate a relationship with you. You didn't ruin anything. You told the truth. The truth doesn't matter if they don't believe me. They'll believe you. Susan's good. The evidence is solid. Morrison can attack our character all he wants, but he can't change the facts. I hope you're right. A pause. Noah, did I make a mistake rejecting the settlement? He thought about that. About everything they'd both endured over the past 2 weeks. About the public examination of their worst moments and most private feelings. No, he said firmly. You did the right thing. Daniel deserves the truth being told, and you made sure it was. That takes courage. I don't feel very courageous. You are anyway. They talked for another hour, breaking every rule Susan and Patricia had set. But it felt necessary. Felt like the only thing keeping either of them from falling apart completely. The trial moved into closing arguments. Susan spoke passionately about corporate negligence and preventable death. Morrison countered with reasonable doubt and emotional manipulation. The jury got the case on a Friday afternoon. And then there was nothing to do but wait. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of Noah pacing his house, unable to sleep, unable to focus on anything except the courthouse downtown, where 12 strangers held the power to validate or destroy everything they'd fought for. Victoria texted him updates from Susan. The jury had requested certain evidence, had asked for testimony to be read back, had sent the judge questions about legal definitions. But none of it meant anything concrete, just more waiting. Ethan tried to help in his 9-year-old way, making elaborate breakfasts and telling knock-knock jokes that weren't funny but were sweet enough to make Noah's chest ache. On the second night, the kid crawled into bed next to Noah at midnight. Can't sleep either? Noah asked. Worried about you and Mrs. Hale. We'll be okay, bud, whatever happens. Will you, though? Ethan's voice was small in the dark. You've been sad for a really long time, Dad. Even before the trial. Since before Mrs. Hale moved here. The observation caught Noah off guard. I didn't think you noticed. I always notice. You think I don't, but I do. Ethan shifted closer. Mom leaving made you sad. Then whatever happened with Mrs. Hale's husband made you sadder.
And then she moved here, and you got even worse because you kept avoiding her. I wasn't avoiding her.
Dad, come on.
Noah huffed a laugh despite everything. Okay, maybe I was avoiding her. Why? She's nice. Because looking at her reminded me of failing someone, of not being able to save her husband when I tried really hard to. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. But you stayed with him, right? That's what you told me before. You stayed so he wouldn't be alone. Yeah. Then you didn't fail. You just couldn't fix everything. That's different. Out of the mouths of children.
Noah pulled his son closer, blinking against the burn in his eyes. When'd you get so smart? Always been smart. You just don't listen. Ethan yawned. I think Mrs. Hale knows you didn't fail too. I think that's why she moved here. She wanted to know the person who stayed. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. And I think you like her. Like really like her. Not just neighbor-like. Noah's breath caught. Ethan, it's okay if you do. I wouldn't be weird about it. She's cool. Has good books. Makes really good lasagna. Another yawn. And you smile more when she's around, even when you're trying not to. I smile plenty. Not like that you don't.
They lay in silence, Noah holding his too perceptive son and wondering when the kid had learned to read people better than most adults. Eventually, Ethan's breathing evened out into sleep, but Noah stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about smiles and staying and the difference between failing and just being human. On the morning of the third day, Susan called. The jury had reached a verdict. Noah met Victoria outside the courthouse. They stood on the steps in the cold morning air, not quite touching but closer than they'd been in weeks. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed and her hands trembling. You ready? Noah asked. No, but I'm going anyway. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Press had showed up. The case had gotten local media attention as the trial progressed. Noah spotted reporters with notebooks, cameras waiting outside for statements. This wasn't just about Victoria and Daniel anymore. It had become something bigger. The jury filed in, 12 faces carefully neutral. The foreperson handed a folded paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. She read it without expression, then looked up. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of negligent homicide, how do you find? The foreperson stood. We find the defendants, Cascade Properties LLC, and its executive officers, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, a sound escaping that was half sob, half gasp. Susan gripped her shoulder. Morrison's face went tight. The executives at the defense table looked stunned. The judge banged her gavel. Order. I'll have order. The room quieted. The judge continued reading the verdict. Guilty on the wrongful death claim. Guilty on the negligence charges. The jury found that Cascade Properties had knowingly violated safety regulations, that their actions had directly caused Daniel Hale's death, that they bore full responsibility. Then came the damages. $32 million in compensatory damages. Another $20 million in punitive damages meant to punish the company and deter similar conduct. It was a complete victory. Total vindication. Everything Victoria had fought for. She was crying openly now, Susan crying beside her. Across the aisle, Morrison gathered his papers with tight, angry movements. The executives were already on their phones, probably calling their insurance companies. Noah watched Victoria from his seat in the gallery, watched her shoulders shake with relief and grief and exhaustion. She'd done it. She'd faced down expensive lawyers and character assassination and weeks of brutal testimony, and she'd won. Daniel's death was now part of public record as a preventable tragedy caused by corporate greed. It would be in newspapers, would be cited in future cases, would mean something beyond just one man's loss. The judge dismissed the jury with thanks and set a date for post-trial motions. As people started filing out, Victoria turned and found Noah in the crowd. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, maybe something more. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed. Susan handled most of it, giving a statement about justice and accountability. But eventually they pushed microphones toward Victoria. Mrs. Hale, you rejected a $15 million settlement to go to trial. Do you regret that decision now? Victoria wiped her eyes, steadied herself. No, this was never about money. It was about making sure my husband's death meant something, that the people responsible couldn't hide behind settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The jury heard the truth today, and they held the right people accountable. That's all I ever wanted. What do you plan to do with the settlement money? I'm going to establish a foundation in Daniel's name for fire safety advocacy and support for families who've lost loved ones in preventable tragedies. So maybe some good can come from this. More questions, more answers. Noah hung back, not wanting to complicate her moment. But as the press conference wound down, one reporter spotted him. "Firefighter Carter, you disobeyed orders to stay with Mr. Hale. Do you have any regrets about that decision?" Noah froze. Cameras swung toward him. This was the moment he could say the right thing, the safe thing, the thing that would protect his career. Instead, he told the truth. "No, I don't regret staying with Daniel Hale. I regret that I couldn't save him. I regret that he died in pain and fear. But I don't regret making sure he wasn't alone. Given the same situation, I'd make the same choice, because some things matter more than protocol. Even if it costs you your job?" Even then, the reporters ate it up, scribbling notes and asking follow-up questions. Patricia appeared at Noah's elbow, gently steering him away before he could say anything else potentially problematic. But the damage, or the truth, depending on how you looked at it, was done. That evening, after the media frenzy had died down and the lawyers had all gone home, Noah sat on his porch with coffee and watched the sun set. His phone had been ringing all day. Chief Martinez wanting to discuss the comments he'd made to press, union reps wanting to know his plans, reporters wanting interviews. He'd ignored most of it, too wrung out to deal with anything beyond existing. A car pulled up. Victoria got out, still in her courtroom clothes, looking as exhausted as Noah felt. "Can I join you?" she asked from the bottom of his porch steps. "Yeah, please." She climbed the steps and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a long moment they just sat in silence, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. "We won," Victoria said finally. "You won. This was your fight. It was our fight. You risked everything to testify, to tell the truth even when Morrison tried to twist it into something ugly. Just told it like it was. No. You gave Daniel dignity. You made sure the jury understood he was a person, not just a casualty. Her voice broke. You gave me back pieces of him I thought I'd lost. The things he said about me, about us, about Italy. I'll carry those forever." Noah's throat tightened. "He loved you a lot. Made sure I knew that. Even dying, he wanted you to know. I do know, because you told me. Because you kept that promise even when keeping it hurt." She turned to look at him. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. For staying with him. For carrying his words. For being willing to destroy your own life to make sure the truth came out. For..." She stopped, searching for words. "For being the kind of person who chooses humanity over protocol. That humanity might cost me my job. Chief called 3 times today." "I know, and that's my fault. If I hadn't filed the lawsuit, you did the right thing. The verdict proved that. Cascade Properties killed your husband through negligence, and now that's public record. Future inspectors can point to this case. Future families can use it as precedent. Daniel's death might save other people's lives. That matters more than my career. It shouldn't have to be a choice. But it is, and I made it with eyes open." Noah set down his coffee mug. "I've spent 2 years being angry at myself for failing Daniel. For not being strong enough or fast enough or smart enough to get him out. But today in that courtroom, listening to all the evidence about how compromised that building was, hearing experts testify that no one could have saved him, I think maybe I've been carrying guilt that was never mine to carry." "You think?" Victoria's voice was gentle but pointed. "Okay, I know. I know I did everything possible. I know staying with him was the right choice, even though it didn't save him. I know..." He had to stop, collect himself. "I know that sometimes trying your best isn't enough, and that doesn't make you a failure. It just makes you human." Sounds like something a smart 9-year-old might have told you. Noah huffed a laugh. "Ethan's been giving me wisdom beyond his years lately. He's a good kid. You've done well with him." "I've tried. Messed up plenty, but tried." They fell into silence again, comfortable now. The streetlights flickered on one by one. The Hendersons' porch light did its usual dying bulb routine. Everything normal and mundane and exactly the same as it had been for months, except everything felt different. So what happens now? Victoria asked. With your job?
Don't know.
Probably a disciplinary hearing. Maybe suspension. Maybe worse. Martinez is fighting for me, but the city's spooked by the publicity. Firefighter admits to disobeying orders on the courthouse steps. Not a great look. But you told the truth. Yeah, but the truth doesn't always protect you. Noah looked at her. What about you? What happens now that the trial's over? I start figuring out how to live again, how to move forward while keeping Daniel with me, how to turn this verdict into something that helps other people. She paused. And I stop avoiding my neighbor. You were avoiding me. I was avoiding you. We were both avoiding each other, for good reasons that stopped being good reasons somewhere along the way. Victoria's hand found his on the porch railing, tentative. Noah, I know the trial's over, but the complications aren't. I know you're facing consequences for testifying. I know the press is going to have opinions about us. I know this is messy and hard and nothing like a normal situation. But I don't want to keep pretending you're just my neighbor. I don't want to keep pretending I moved here only to understand the man who stayed with Daniel. I moved here because reading your name in that report felt like meeting someone important, and I was right. You are important. To me. And maybe we could figure out what that means after everything settles. Noah turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I'd like that. But you should know, I'm a mess. I've got PTSD from calls I can't shake. I work too much. I'm not great at talking about feelings. Ethan's got me beat on emotional intelligence by a mile. And I still can't look at warehouse fires without feeling like I'm drowning. And you should know I'm a mess too. I have nightmares about the day Daniel died. I overplan everything because losing control terrifies me. I'm probably going to have moments where I fall apart for no reason. And I still wear my wedding ring because I'm not ready to take it off. She held up her left hand, showing the thin silver band Noah had noticed that first morning. He'd seen it every day since, but never mentioned it. I'm not asking you to take it off, Noah said quietly. Daniel's part of who you are. He always will be. And that's okay. Is it? Because most people would be bothered by dating a widow who's still in love with her dead husband. Good thing I'm not most people. Noah squeezed her hand. Daniel brought us together in the worst possible way, but he did bring us together, and I think maybe he'd be okay with this. With us trying to build something good out of something terrible. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. I think he would too. He wouldn't want me to be alone forever. And I don't think he'd want me to spend the rest of my life punishing myself for being human. They sat together as full dark fell, hands linked, both of them crying and smiling and starting to believe that maybe they could carry their grief together instead of letting it crush them separately. The door banged open. Ethan appeared, took one look at them, and grinned. Finally, he announced, I was starting to think you two were never going to figure it out. Ethan, Noah started. What? It's true. You've been making sad eyes at each other for months. It was painful to watch. He looked at Victoria. Hi, Mrs. Hale. Dad's a mess, but he's a good mess. You should keep him. Victoria laughed through her tears. I'll take that under advisement. Cool. Can we have dinner together again? I miss your cooking. No offense, Dad, but your lasagna is terrible. None taken. It is terrible. So that's a yes? Ethan looked between them hopefully. Noah glanced at Victoria, who nodded. Yeah, bud, that's a yes. Now go inside. Grown-ups are talking. Grown-ups are holding hands and crying. That's different from talking. But Ethan went anyway, calling over his shoulder, I'm reading in the living room if you need me to be cute and precocious to break any awkward silences. The door closed. Noah and Victoria looked at each other and burst out laughing. Your son's something else, Victoria managed. Yeah, he really is. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, talking about everything and nothing. About the trial and the verdict and what came next. About Daniel and the life Victoria had lost. About Noah's fears and Victoria's plans for the foundation. About whether they were crazy to try building something together when everything was still so raw and complicated. Eventually, Noah walked Victoria to her door, suddenly nervous like this was a first date, instead of just two neighbors saying goodnight. Thank you, Victoria said on her porch, for everything, for testifying, for telling the truth, for being brave when I needed someone to be brave with me. Thank you for not giving up, on the case, on Daniel's memory, on me. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and soft. Good night, Noah. Good night, Victoria. He walked home feeling lighter than he had in 2 years. The disciplinary hearing happened 2 weeks later. Noah sat across from a panel of fire department brass and city attorneys, all of them looking stern and official. Chief Martinez sat beside him, and Patricia was there in an advisory capacity, even though this was internal department business. They went through it all again. The evacuation order, Noah's decision to stay, the risk assessment, whether his actions constituted insubordination or appropriate use of discretion. Firefighter Carter, the deputy chief said, "You understand that your comments to the press created a public relations issue for the department?" "Yes, sir." "You essentially admitted to disobeying orders and said you'd do it again. That's problematic." "With respect, sir, I said I'd make the same choice given the same circumstances. I'd stay with a dying civilian rather than leave them alone. I don't think that's something the department should punish me for." One of the city attorneys leaned forward. "But you created risk to yourself and potentially to other firefighters who might have had to rescue you. I assessed that risk as acceptable given the circumstances. A conscious civilian was trapped and dying. Protocol says we don't leave viable victims. I made a judgment call. Against your captain's direct order. My captain ordered a general evacuation. I exercised discretion to remain with a victim who needed immediate assistance. That's within the scope of my training and authority." They went back and forth for an hour. Patricia jumped in when needed, citing regulations and precedents. Chief Martinez testified that Noah's overall record was exemplary, that this was one incident in 9 years of excellent service, that punishing a firefighter for showing compassion would set a dangerous precedent. Finally, they asked Noah to step outside while they deliberated. He paced the hallway for 30 minutes before they called him back in. "Firefighter Carter," the deputy chief said, "this panel has reviewed your record, the incident in question, and the testimony provided today. We find that while your decision to remain in the structure after evacuation was ordered showed questionable judgment, it was not motivated by insubordination or malice. Given the unique circumstances and your otherwise exemplary record, we're issuing a written reprimand. This will go in your personnel file, but will not affect your rank or pay. However, you're being placed on administrative notice. Any future incidents involving failure to follow orders will result in more serious consequences. Do you understand?" Basis? Relief flooded through Noah. "Yes, sir. I understand. You're a good firefighter, Carter, but you can't save everyone, and trying to do so by bypassing protocols puts lives at risk. Learn from this." "I will, sir." Outside, Chief Martinez clapped him on the shoulder. "Could have been worse. Could have been better." "True. But you get to keep your job and your conscience. Not everyone can say that." Martinez paused. The comment to the press about making the same choice again, that was either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the stupidest. "Maybe both." "Yeah, probably both." Martinez grinned. "For what it's worth, I'd have stayed too. Don't tell the brass I said that." Noah returned to work the next shift to a mixture of reactions. Some guys were supportive, saying they'd have made the same call. Others kept their distance, like Noah's decision had been a betrayal of protocol. A few made comments about the widow next door, implications that made Noah's jaw clench. But he got through it, focused on the work, did his job, proved that one incident didn't define him. Victoria, meanwhile, was dealing with her own aftermath. The settlement money came through, $52 million after legal fees. She set up the Daniel Hale Foundation with most of it, dedicated to fire safety advocacy and support for families affected by preventable tragedies. She hired staff, rented office space, started building the thing that would turn her husband's death into something that helped others. And slowly, carefully, she and Noah figured out what they were to each other. It wasn't a fairy tale. Wasn't love conquering all or grief magically disappearing because they found each other. Victoria still had bad days where she couldn't get out of bed, where the weight of losing Daniel crushed her. Noah still woke up from nightmares about the warehouse, still flinched at certain calls, still carried guilt that didn't fade just because a jury said he'd done nothing wrong. But they learned to be honest with each other, learned that grief didn't have a timeline and healing wasn't linear. Learned that sometimes love looked like sitting in silence while someone cried or holding their hand during a nightmare, or just existing in the same space while they worked through whatever they were working through. 6 months after the trial, on a warm September evening, Noah and Victoria sat on her porch while Ethan played basketball in the driveway. The kid had gotten tall over the summer, growing into the gangly adolescence that would eventually make him taller than Noah. "He's good," Victoria observed, watching Ethan nail a three-pointer. "Gets it from his mom. I'm useless at sports." "You run into burning buildings for a living. That counts as athletic. That's different. That's just controlled panic." Victoria laughed, the sound easier now than it had been months ago. She still wore her wedding ring, but she held Noah's hand without hesitation. They'd found a balance, honoring the past while building something new. "I got a call from a reporter today," Victoria said. "Wants to do a follow-up story on the foundation, how we're helping families, what changes we're advocating for." "That's good. Exposure helps." "Yeah, but she also wants to interview you about staying with Daniel, about how that decision shaped the foundation's mission." Victoria glanced at him. "I told her I'd ask." Noah thought about that, about putting himself and his choices back in the public eye, about reliving that day again for strangers' consumption. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think your story matters. I think hearing from the person who was there, who made the choice to prioritize humanity over protocol, could help people understand why this work is important." She squeezed his hand. "But I also think you've given enough. If you don't want to do it, that's okay." Noah watched Ethan shoot hoops, this kid who'd learned too young that life was messy and hard, but still found ways to be joyful. He thought about Daniel's last words and the promise he'd kept, and the way telling the truth had cost him, but also freed him. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "We do it together, tell the whole story, not just the fire, but what came after, how we found each other, how we're trying to build something good from something terrible. All of it." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You sure? That's a lot to share." "Yeah, but maybe someone needs to hear it. Maybe someone else is carrying guilt they don't need to carry, or grieving someone and thinking they have to do it alone. Maybe our mess can help someone else's mess feel a little less impossible." "When did you get so wise?" "Learned from a 9-year-old. He's full of wisdom." They did the interview 3 weeks later, sitting together in Victoria's living room while cameras rolled. The reporter asked hard questions, and they gave honest answers about the fire, about Daniel's death, about Noah's guilt and Victoria's grief, about moving in next door and the trial and everything that came after. "So you're together now?" the reporter asked. "Despite everything?" "Because of everything," Victoria corrected, "not in spite of it. We found each other through tragedy, and we're learning to heal together. It's not neat or clean or simple, but it's real." "And the foundation? How does firefighter Carter's involvement in your husband's death inform the work you're doing?" "Noah represents everything the foundation stands for," Victoria said firmly, "making choices that prioritize human life and dignity. Refusing to let protocols and bureaucracy erase the fact that behind every tragedy is a real person with a real life. He stayed with Daniel when protocol said to leave. He testified even when it cost him. He's chosen truth and compassion at every turn. That's the model we want to promote." The interview aired 2 months later. Response was overwhelming, some positive, some critical, all of it intense. But the foundation's donations tripled. Families reached out for support. Fire departments started using the Daniel Hale case in training about discretion and judgment calls. And slowly, the story of the firefighter who stayed and the widow next door became something bigger than just their personal tragedy. It became a conversation about grief and healing, and choosing to move forward without forgetting. A year after the trial, Victoria stood in front of a crowd at the foundation's first annual fundraiser. Noah sat at a table with Ethan, watching her speak about Daniel's legacy and the work they were doing. She was poised and articulate, no longer the grief-stricken widow, but a woman who'd transformed tragedy into purpose. "My husband died because people chose shortcuts over safety," Victoria said into the microphone. "But his death led to change. Building codes have been strengthened. Inspection protocols have been updated. Families have gotten support they desperately needed. And while none of that brings Daniel back, it means his life and death mattered. It means something good came from something terrible." She looked directly at Noah. "I also want to thank someone who made this all possible. The firefighter who stayed with Daniel in his last moments. Who carried his words for 2 years. Who risked everything to make sure the truth was told. Noah Carter, would you stand, please?" Noah's face flushed as people turned to look at him. He stood reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention. Noah represents what we all hope for in our darkest moments, Victoria continued. Someone who sees us as human beings, not just another emergency. Someone who stays when it's hard. Someone who carries our stories with dignity and care. The foundation exists because of what he did that day, and because of his courage in telling the truth afterward. Thank you, Noah, for everything. The room erupted in applause. Noah sat down quickly, overwhelmed. Ethan patted his arm. You're kind of famous, Dad. I'm really not. You are to Mrs. Hale, and to all these people. Just take the compliment. Later, after the speeches and the fundraising and the socializing, Noah and Victoria stood outside in the cool night air. You didn't have to do that, Noah said. The whole standing ovation thing. Yes, I did. You deserve recognition for what you did. I just did my job. No, you did more than your job. You did the thing that changed everything. She took his hand. I know we've been taking things slow. I know we agreed not to rush into anything serious. But Noah, I need you to know, I love you. Not because you stayed with Daniel, and not because you helped me through the trial. I love you because you're kind and honest and brave, even when you're scared. Because you're a good father and a good man. Because being with you feels like coming home. Noah's throat tightened. I love you too. Have for a while now. Was just waiting for the right time to say it. Is this the right time? Yeah, I think it is. He kissed her there under the stars, in front of the building where they'd just raised $250,000 in Daniel's name. It felt right. Felt like honoring the past while claiming the future. They got married a year later, a small ceremony in Victoria's backyard with Ethan as the best man. Victoria wore a simple dress and kept her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. Noah wore his dress uniform. They exchanged vows that acknowledged the tragedy that brought them together and the hope they'd built from it. I promise to carry Daniel's memory with you, Noah said, to honor the man whose last words brought us together, to never forget that our love exists because of his life and his death. I promise to let you be human, Victoria said, to remember that you can't save everyone and that trying anyway makes you brave, not broken, to build a life with you that honors both who we were and who we're becoming. It wasn't a traditional ceremony, but nothing about their relationship had ever been traditional. Ethan gave a speech at the reception that made everyone cry and laugh. My dad spent 2 years thinking he failed someone, the kid said, now 11 and entirely too articulate. But he didn't fail. He stayed when staying was hard. He cared when caring hurt. And because he did that, he'd started calling her Victoria instead of Mrs. Hale at her request. Because he did that, Victoria knew her husband didn't die alone. And that mattered enough that she moved next door to a grumpy firefighter who shoveled driveways at 3 a.m. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. I'm glad you moved here, Ethan continued, looking at Victoria. I'm glad you didn't give up on my dad even when he was being stubborn. I'm glad we get to be a family now, and I'm glad, his voice cracked slightly, I'm glad something good came from something so sad. Daniel would probably like that his death led to my dad not being alone anymore. Led to you not being alone, led to all of us being here together. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. That night, after the guests had left and Ethan had gone to bed, Noah and Victoria sat on their porch. They'd chosen to live in her house since it was bigger, and looked at the stars. You think Daniel would approve? Noah asked quietly. I think he'd be glad I found someone who makes me laugh again, who takes care of me, who understands that loving you doesn't mean I stopped loving him. Victoria leaned her head on Noah's shoulder. I think he'd like you. Yeah? Yeah, you both had this thing about doing the right thing even when it was hard, about caring too much and trying too hard and never quite believing you were good enough. Sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also what makes you who you are. She lifted her head to look at him. Thank you for staying, with Daniel, with me, for not running when things got hard. Thank you for not letting me run. For moving next door and demanding honesty and refusing to let me hide from you. They kissed, gentle and unhurried. Inside, their son slept peacefully. Around them, the neighborhood settled into night. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt less like something to fear and more like something to hope for. Because that's what love does, Noah thought. Real love. Not the easy kind that shows up when everything's perfect, but the hard kind that stays when things fall apart. The kind that acknowledges pain and grief and loss, but chooses to build something beautiful anyway. He'd stayed with Daniel Hale in a burning warehouse because leaving him alone felt wrong. And that choice, that moment of choosing compassion over protocol, had led to this. To a wife who understood him, to a foundation helping others, to a life that honored tragedy without being defined by it. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some stories are just about people doing their best in impossible situations and living with the consequences. But this story, their story, had become something else. Proof that even the worst moments could lead somewhere good if you were brave enough to stay, brave enough to tell the truth, brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. Noah had spent 2 years believing he'd failed Daniel Hale, but sitting on his porch with Victoria's head on his shoulder, the weight of that failure had transformed into something else entirely. Not absolution. He'd never fully shake the wish that he could have saved Daniel. But acceptance. Understanding that he'd done what mattered most. He'd made sure a dying man knew he was seen, heard, and cared for in his final moments. And Daniel's final gift, whether intentional or not, was bringing together two broken people and giving them a chance to heal each other. The truth was messy and complicated and hurt like hell, but it was still worth telling, still worth fighting for, still worth staying for. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, staying through the hard parts led you to something worth keeping, someone worth loving, a future worth building. Noah tightened his arm around Victoria and looked up at the stars, thinking about promises kept and second chances and the strange, terrible, beautiful ways that grief could transform into hope. They'd never forget, never stop carrying Daniel, but they'd learn to carry him together, and that made all the difference.